Hello guys, welcome to Fiction Quest. So in this video, we will see, what if Naruto was sent to Fire Force and got married to Maki, Tamaki, and Hibana? If you enjoy these kinds of stories, don't forget to show us some love by hitting the like button and subscribing to the channel. Your support means the world to us. Now, let's start the story. Chapter 1. The Stranger in the Embers. The universe screamed. It was a silent, gut-wrenching shriek that tore through the space between realities, a sound that existed only in the conceptual plane where gods bled. He felt it in his bones, in the very fabric of the chakra that was his lifeblood. One moment, he was driving a fist shimmering with the power of 6 paths and 9 beasts into the alabaster flesh of a goddess. The next, reality fractured like a pane of glass struck by a sledgehammer. Sasuke was there, his Rinnegan a swirling vortex of purple, straining against the dimensional rift Kagaya had torn open in her death throes. A final, desperate act of spite. The rabbit goddess, a being who traveled between stars as easily as he once hopped between branches, had thrown her last ounce of power not into an attack, but into an act of cosmic banishment. Naruto. Sasuke's voice was a strained rasp, his hand reaching, the tips of their fingers brushing. The world dissolved, not into light, not into darkness, but into a nauseating smear of every color that had ever existed and a billion more that hadn't. He felt his being, his very soul, pulled thin like molten glass. It was a pain beyond pain, a dissolution of self. Kurama, the 9-tailed fox sealed within him, roared in fury and terror inside their shared soul space, a blazing sun of chakra fighting to hold their existence together. Kit, hold on. Don't let go. Let go of what? There was nothing left to hold. He was a memory, a thought, an echo in a storm of non-existence. He squeezed his eyes shut, not against the non-light, but as a final, instinctual act of defiance. He focused on a single image. A worn stone face on a mountain, a bowl of steaming ramen, the cerulean blue of a teammate's eyes, the vibrant pink of another's hair. Home. The screaming stopped. The sensation that replaced it was one of falling, a terminal velocity plummet through something thick and acrid, like smoke and sorrow. His senses, honed by years of sage training, came back online with a jolt. He tasted soot on his tongue. He smelled burnt metal and something else, something cloyingly sweet and horrifyingly familiar, the scent of cooked meat. He heard a distant, cacophonous roar, a sound that was not one voice, but a legion of them, all wailing in unison. And then, impact. It wasn't a crash, it was an arrival. He hit the ground with the force of a meteor, but his body, reinforced by the potent energy of the 6 paths, absorbed the kinetic force. The world around him, however, did not. The asphalt and concrete of what looked like a ruined industry. Al Street erupted upwards in a wave of black stone and twisted rebar. A perfect crater, 20 meters wide, bloomed into existence with him at its epicenter. Naruto Uzumaki pushed himself to one knee, his tattered black and orange jacket hanging off his frame. His right arm, the one gifted to him by Granny Tsunade, was intact. His other, the one he'd lost, was still a construct of pure, incandescent chakra, glowing softly in the oppressive gloom. He blinked, his sapphire eyes, marked by the golden pigment of sage mode that had become almost second nature, scanning the alien horizon. Gray buildings, skeletal and scarred, clawed at a sky choked with a perpetual brown haze. Pipes, thick as ancient trees, crisscrossed the cityscape, venting steam and smoke in a rhythmic, mechanical sigh. This was not Konoha. This was not the land of fire. This was nowhere he had ever known. Kurama, where are we? The great fox was quiet for a moment, his senses stretching out through Naruto's. I don't know. This place, it feels wrong. The natural energy is thin, choked. But there's another energy. It's faint, everywhere, like the residue of millions of tiny, agonizing screams. Naruto pushed himself to his feet, the dust settling around him. The distant, multi-toned roar grew louder, accompanied by the shriek of tortured metal and the percussive thump-thump-thump of some kind of battle. Duty, ingrained in him more deeply than any jutsu, took over. Where there was a fight, there were people in danger. He took a single step, and then blurred, a flicker of orange and gold vanishing from the center of the crater. Fall back to position Gamma. Hinawa, give me a status report. Captain Akitaru Obi's voice, amplified by his helmet's comms, was a bedrock of calm in a hurricane of flame. His muscles, strained as he and the rest of his squad heaved against a massive, overturned tanker truck, trying to form a barricade. Trajectory analysis shows its next attack will target the residential block, Captain. We have a 40% chance of containment if we can divert it west, towards the foundry, Lieutenant Hinawa's clipped, precise voice replied from a nearby rooftop. Maki, status on suppression. Its thermal output is off the charts. My fire spirits are getting snuffed out before they can even make contact. Maki-O's grunted, her toned arms braced. Her witch's hat was askew, and soot streaked her determined face. Before her, two massive, floating balls of flame, shaped like cartoonish owls with angry eyes, flickered and struggled against a torrent of incandescent plasma. They were Sputter and Flare, her fiery familiars. And they were losing. The source of the plasma was a monster that defied sanity. It stood 12 meters tall, a vaguely humanoid shape sculpted from molten slag, charred bone. And the fused bodies of at least a dozen people. Faces, locked in silent screams, shifted and emerged from its tar-black hide. This was a demon-class infernal, a being of pure, agonizing combustion. And it was tearing their district apart. Lucky Lecher Lure. A yelp came from the flank. Everyone grit their teeth. Tamaki Kotatsu, who was supposed to be providing covering fire from a different angle, suddenly stumbled as her bulky firefighter's coat inexplicably flew open and snagged on a jutting piece of rebar, peeling away to reveal the skimpy two-piece she wore beneath. The infernal's multi-eyed head swiveled, its attention momentarily drawn by the flash of skin. Tamaki, get your head in the game. Arthur Boyle shouted, his delusions of knighthood the only thing keeping him from panicking. He held his plasma-bladed sword, Excalibur, in a classic fencing pose. The dragon has been distracted by the damsel. A classic trope. Now, Shinra. A red blur shot past. On it, Shinra Kusakabe, flames erupting from the soles of his feet, rocketed towards the infernal, his grin a rictus of nervous tension. He aimed a flying kick at its knee, a move he called the Rapid Man Kick. His foot connected with a sound like a gong, and the infernal barely budged. It swatted at him like a fly, and Shinra was forced to disengage, his trajectory wild. This was bad. They were Company 8, specialists in investigating the other companies and the truth of human combustion, but they were still firefighters. This demon was a match for the full force of a frontline combat company, and they were being systematically dismantled. We can't hold it, Obi said, his voice grim. He looked at the residential block just 200 meters away. Hinawa, prepare to issue a civilian evacuation warning. Everyone else, prepare for a tactical retreat. We'll delay it as long as we can. It felt like a death sentence. Delaying this thing meant being consumed. Maki braced herself, her knuckles white. She was a second-generation pyrokinetic, a master of controlling existing flames, but this was like trying to redirect a solar flare with a garden hose. The infernal reared back, its cavernous chest glowing with a terrifying, white-hot intensity. It was gathering energy for another blast, one that would surely obliterate their flimsy barricade. This was it. And then, something new entered the battlefield. It wasn't a sound. Not at first. It was a pressure change. A sudden, localized drop in air density that made Jijik ears pop. A blur of motion, too fast to be Shinra, too fluid to be anything they had ever seen, appeared between them and the infernal. He stood there, a young man in a tattered orange and black jacket, his back to them. His hair was a shocking shade of sun yellow, and he seemed utterly calm. A rock of serenity in the face of Armageddon. He wasn't wearing any protective gear. He looked lost. Get out of there, citizen. Obi bellowed, a spike of cold fear piercing his professional calm. It's not safe. The stranger didn't seem to hear. He just raised his head, looking up at the colossal infernal as it unleashed its built-up energy. A river of white-hot plasma, wide as a house, surged towards him. Maki's heart stopped. Tamaki screamed. The man in orange simply lifted his right hand. A sphere of swirling, howling wind, a miniature hurricane of impossible density, materialized in his palm. It was blue, a vibrant, perfect cerulean, and it didn't burn. It spun with a high-pitched, harmonic shriek that cut through the infernal's roar. He met the river of fire with his spinning sphere. What happened next broke the laws of their world. Fire did not meet fire. Heat was not countered by a greater heat. The instant the plasma torrent hit the blue sphere, it was not vaporized or deflected. It was shredded. The organized, directional flow of energy was torn apart, ripped into harmless, glittering particles of light and superheated air. The Rasengan, a perfect application of shape and rotational transformation, didn't fight the fire on its own terms. It simply unmade it. The torrent of plasma, a force that could melt steel in an instant, was utterly, completely, and silently annihilated. Silence descended upon the battlefield. The only sound was the faint, whistling hum of the blue sphere in the stranger's hand as it spun down and vanished. Company 8 stared, mouths agape. Even the infernal seemed confused, its multiple heads tilting. Naruto lowered his hand, his expression unreadable. His sage mode was feeding him a constant stream of information. The creature before him was a monstrosity of negative emotion and corrupted life force. It was suffering. Its very existence was an agony. He could feel the dozens of souls trapped within, burning, crying. There was only one way to end that. What was that? Shinra stammered over the comms, perched on a ruined wall. He's not a pyrokinetic. Hinawa's voice was sharp, analytical, but laced with a thread of pure disbelief. There was no ignition, no heat signature from his body. That was something else. The infernal, its confusion giving way to rage, swung a massive, slag-covered arm at Naruto. The limb was the size of a small car, and it moved with deceptive speed. Naruto didn't even look at it. He took a single, flowing step to the side, the arm passing harmlessly through the air where he'd been. As it went by, he placed his palm flat against its side. He didn't push, he just touched it, and the arm exploded, not in a fiery blast, but in a concussive shockwave. The slag and bone shattered outwards, turning to dust and shrapnel. The infernal howled, its symphony of screams rising in pitch. It stumbled back, its balance thrown. Incredible, Maki breathed, her analytical trying and failing to process what she was seeing. It wasn't fire. It wasn't brute strength in the way she understood it. It was precise. It was control on a level she couldn't comprehend. Naruto flickered. One moment he was on the ground, the next he was standing on the infernal's shoulder, having run up its body in the span of a single heartbeat. He looked down at the central, howling maw on its chest. This is the core, he thought. End its suffering. Let it go, he said, his voice quiet but carrying in the sudden lull. He brought his hands together in a familiar cross-shaped seal. Shadow clone jutsu. With two silent puffs of smoke, two perfect duplicates of him appeared on the infernal's back. They got to work immediately. One began forming another Rasengan, while Naruto himself stretched out his right hand. A storm of chakra gathered. It shrieked, a sound like 1,000 birds chirping at once, then deepened into a grinding, elemental roar. A four-pointed, star-like shuriken of pure wind energy formed in his hand. Spinning so fast it was a translucent blur. From her rooftop perch, Hinawa's thermal goggles went haywire. Captain, I'm reading nothing. It's a complete energy void. It's sucking all the heat out of the air around it. Wind style. Rasenshuriken. Naruto thrust the spinning vortex of death downwards into the infernal's core. There was no explosion of fire. There was only sound and pressure. A deafening, high-frequency roar of 1,000,000 microscopic wind blades grinding against existence itself. A dome of translucent energy expanded rapidly from the point of impact, washing over the infernal's upper torso. Inside the dome, reality seemed to ripple. The infernal's body wasn't burned, or blown apart. It was disintegrated, erased, turned into absolute nothingness on a cellular level. When the dome vanished a second later, so did the top half of the demon infernal. The legs stood for a moment, then crumbled into a mountain of black dust and cooling embers. The screams finally, mercifully, went silent. The man in orange landed softly on the pile of ash, a gentle breeze his only escort. He stood for a moment, his head bowed, his hands clasped together as if in prayer. Rest easy. The silence that followed was absolute. It was heavier than any building, more profound than any command. Company 8, a team of specialists who fought fire with fire, had just witnessed a single unknown man extinguish a demon-class threat not with flames, but with wind and force and something else entirely. He had ended the fight in less than a minute. A fight that, had been on the verge of costing them their lives. Naruto turned, his sage-marked eyes sweeping over them. His gaze was not hostile, not arrogant. It was calm, assessing. He took in the overturned truck, the scorch marks, the exhausted figures in their heavy blue-lined coats. Then his eyes moved past them, to the residential block they had been protecting. He saw a small group of civilians peeking out from behind a corner, their faces pale with terror. His first move was not towards the fire soldiers. He walked, his steps measured and silent, towards the civilians. He stopped a few meters away, holding up a hand in a gesture of peace. "It's over," he said, his voice surprisingly warm. "It's safe now. Are any of you hurt?" Maki Oz watched, her mind reeling. She had seen power before. She'd seen the raw, destructive joy of Shinra's kicks, the elegant deadliness of Arthur's plasma, the overwhelming presence of Captain Burns of the First. But this was different. This was not the power of combustion. It was the power of a natural disaster held in check by an iron will. And the first thing he did, after wielding that apocalyptic force, was to check on the innocent. This man wasn't a monster. He was a protector. Captain Obi was the first to move. He motioned for his squad to stand down, his own mind working furiously. Unknown. Unclassified pyrokinetic. No, Hina was right. This is something new. A threat. An ally. His training and instincts screamed caution, but his gut told him something else. He started walking towards the stranger, Hinawa falling into step beside him, her expression a mask of intense, analytical curiosity. Naruto watched them approach. His sage mode registered no deceit, no killing intent. Just caution, exhaustion, and a deep well of responsibility from the man in the lead. He relaxed his stance infinitesimally. "That was quite a display," Obi said, his voice even. He stopped a respectful distance away. "On behalf of Special Fire Force Company 8, and the citizens of this district, thank you. You saved a lot of lives today." Naruto gave a short, single nod. "It's what I do." He looked at Obi's helmet, then at the insignia on his shoulder. "Fire Force, are you this world's version of a police force?" "Something like that," Obi confirmed. "We put the souls of those who've turned into infernals to rest." "I'm Captain Obi of Company 8. And you are?" Before Naruto could answer, a small, clumsy scramble sounded from the side. Tamaki, having finally untangled herself, was rushing over, her face a mixture of awe and mortification. "That was amazing. I've never seen anything like it. How did you?" "Whoa." Her foot caught on a loose piece of pavement. The infamous, otherworldly force of the Lucky Lecher lure activated with impeccable timing. Tamaki pitched forward, her arms flailing, on a direct collision course with Naruto. The men of Company 8 braced for the inevitable, awkward scene. It never came. Naruto moved with a liquid grace that defied the eye. He didn't just catch her. He rotated with her momentum, one hand supporting her back, the other her arm, spinning her gently out of the fall and setting her upright on her feet as if they were in the middle of a dance. Her half-unbuttoned jacket was jostled, but nothing more was revealed. He didn't stumble, didn't flinch, didn't even seem to notice her state of undress. He just steadied her, his grip firm but respectful. "Careful," he said, his voice low and concerned. He looked her directly in the eyes, his own gaze clear and unwavering. "Are you all right? You're not injured?" Tamaki froze. She stared up at him, her mind blank. No one had ever reacted like that. Ever. Usually, it was a panic of flailing limbs, averted eyes, blushes, and stuttered apologies. He hadn't even blinked. He'd just helped her. And his eyes held no judgment, no flicker of anything but genuine concern. A strange warmth, entirely unrelated to fire, bloomed in her chest. I'm fine," she stammered, feeling her face heat up for a reason entirely different from embarrassment. "Thank you." Naruto gave her a small, reassuring smile before turning his attention back to Obi. "My name is Naruto Uzumaki." "Uzumaki," Hinawa repeated, filing the name away. "That's not a name in the Tokyo Empire's census registry. I wouldn't expect it to be," Naruto said, a flicker of weariness touching his features. "I'm not from around here. Not from this country, maybe not even from this world." That statement hung in the air, heavier than the smoke. It was insane. It was impossible. But after what they had just seen, Was it any more impossible than a man shredding fire with wind? Maki walked over, her sputter and flare having dissipated. She stopped beside Tamaki, her gaze fixed on Naruto. She was a soldier, a warrior. She recognized the look in his eyes. It was the same look she saw in Captain Obi's, the look of someone who carried the weight of others on his shoulders. But his was older, deeper. As if he'd been carrying that weight for 1,000 years. Your control, she said, the words coming out before she could stop them. The way you contained the energy, I've never seen anything like it. It was precise. There was no excess, no wasted energy. Naruto's gaze shifted to her. He saw the strength in her stance, the discipline in her eyes. He had noticed her during the fight, her desperate but valiant attempt to hold the line. You have good control, too, he replied, giving a slight nod of respect. Holding back that much heat is difficult. You're strong. Maki's breath caught. She was strong. She knew it. She was a former soldier, a guerrilla cyclops in a witch's hat, as she often joked. But she was constantly chided for it, told to be more feminine, more delicate. Men were often intimidated by her raw physical power. This stranger, this wielder of storms, had looked at her and seen her strength not as a flaw, but as a virtue. He'd stated it as a simple, observable fact. A flush crept up her neck, and she looked down. Uncharacteristically flustered. A low, guttural growl, audible only to Naruto, echoed in his mind. This is all very touching, but we have a problem, Kurama said. Naruto's head tilted slightly, his eyes losing focus for a fraction of a second as he turned his senses inward and outward. What is it? There's someone watching. From that tower, 2 clicks north. I've been feeling him since the fight started. He's not like these firefighters. His energy, it's cold, razor sharp, and it feels like that choked, wrong energy that permeates this whole dimension, but concentrated. Pure. He's not watching with his eyes, Naruto. He's watching with his soul. Naruto's own sage mode, piggybacking on Kurama's senses, reached out. He found it. A presence. It felt like a sliver of ice in a bonfire. A void in the flow of life. It was calm, ancient, and utterly without pity. It observed his power, his very existence, with the detached interest of a biologist studying a particularly unusual insect before pinning it to a board. This was not a simple enemy. This was a predator of a higher order. He feels holy, Kurama amended, the word tasting like ash in their shared mind. In the same way a typhoon feels holy, inevitable, absolute. This world's demon is more than just mindless rage. Be careful, Naruto. The presence vanished. One moment it was there, a pillar of sea. Old judgment on the horizon of his senses. The next, it was gone, as if it had never been. A shiver, not of cold, but of pure instinct, traced its way down Naruto's spine. He brought his attention back to the present. Obi was speaking to him, his expression serious. Uzumaki-san, you're a man with impossible power, in a world you don't know, with nowhere to go. You're a danger to yourself and others, whether you mean to be or not. The Holy Sol Temple and the other captains will be calling for your head or your surrender for study the moment they hear about this. You are an anomaly, and this world doesn't like anomalies. Naruto's gaze hardened slightly. I'm not going to be anyone's lab rat. I'm not asking you to be, Obi said, holding up a hand. My company, the 8th, is different. We're not just firefighters. We investigate the truth of the cataclysm, of the infernals, of the temple itself. We're a home for oddballs and outcasts. For people who don't quite fit. He gestured to his squad. A wannabe knight. A boy with a devil's grin. A woman cursed with unfortunate luck, a disciplined witch. You'd be the oddest of us all, but you'd fit right in. He offered Naruto a genuine, tired smile. I can't offer you a way home. I can't promise you'll be safe. But I can offer you a roof, a meal, and a place to stand with people who will have your back. Come with us. Let us help you, and in turn, you can help us. Naruto studied the man's face. He saw no lies. His sage mode felt the unwavering sincerity in Obi's heart. He was a good man, trying to do the right thing in a world of burning chaos. It was a story Naruto knew all too well. He was alone, adrift in a sea of unknowns. He needed an anchor, a place to learn the rules of this new, broken reality. And more than that, he needed allies. He looked past Obi, at the faces of Company 8, at Maki, who watched him with a mixture of professional awe and a newfound, personal respect. At Tamaki, who was still trying to process his simple act of kindness. Her cheeks tinged with pink. At a world filled with burning people and a cold, predatory presence lurking in the shadows. His path was, as always, clear. "All right," Naruto said, his voice ringing with a decision that felt more significant than just accepting shelter. "I'm in." A whirlwind had just found a place to land, right in the heart of the embers. And the world of the Special Fire Force would never be the same. Chapter 1 End. Chapter 2. The Witch and the Whirlwind. The headquarters of Special Fire Force Company 8 was less of a military base and more of a forgotten church that had decided to put up a fight against the apocalypse. Stone archways soared into a perpetually gloomy ceiling, their graceful lines marred by the incongruous additions of steel girders, computer terminals, and a fireman's pole. The place smelled of old hymnals, ozone, and Lieutenant Hinawa's notoriously strong coffee. For Naruto, it was the quietest place he'd been in 24 hours, and the strangest home he'd ever had. He sat at the long wooden table in the common area, nursing a mug of lukewarm water. He'd politely declined the coffee, its bitter scent an assault on his sage-enhanced senses. Across from him, Captain Obi, stripped of his helmet and bunker gear, looked every inch the weary but resolute leader. Lieutenant Hinawa stood beside him, a tablet in his hand, his eyes narrowed in ceaseless analysis. "So, to recap," Hinawa said, his tone as crisp as a freshly printed report. "You are from another dimension, brought here by a space-time jutsu, initiated by a being you describe as a chakra goddess." Naruto took a sip of water. "That's the short version, yeah. And this chakra," Hinawa continued, tapping his screen, "is an internal energy source, distinct from the ignition abilities of pyrokinetics. It allows for superhuman physical feats, elemental manipulation, as demonstrated by your Rasenshuriken, and the creation of solid mass duplicates. Clones," Naruto corrected gently. "They're not just solid, they think. Up to a point." Obi rubbed the back of his thick neck. "And the nine-tailed fox." Naruto fell silent for a moment. He could feel Kurama stir in the vast, sunlit plains of their shared mindscape, a low grumble of proprietary annoyance. "He's my partner. His name is Kurama. We share a life, and we share our power. The sheer impossibility of it all should have gotten him thrown in a padded cell." But they had all seen the crater. They had seen a demon infernal erased from existence. They were past the point of disbelief and were now grappling with the terrifying logistics of it. "The other captains are already screaming," Obi said, leaning forward, his forearms on the table. "Burns of the first wants you brought in for questioning. Kareem Flam of the second wants to know how your wind interacts with his sound. And the Holy Sol Temple, they're alternating between calling you a miracle and a heresy. It's a mess. I don't want to cause trouble," Naruto said, his gaze steady. "But I won't be caged." "You won't be," Obi stated, his voice an iron promise. "You're under the protection of the 8th. For now, that's enough. Get some rest. Get familiar with the place. We'll handle the politics." As Obi and Hinawa departed to deal with the inevitable bureaucratic firestorm, Naruto was left in the relative quiet of the common room. Shinra and Arthur were arguing in a corner, their voices a low murmur of heroic boasts and skeptical retorts. Naruto's senses, however, were drawn to the training yard out back. He could hear the rhythmic thud of impacts. Heavy and controlled, he found Maki O's there. She was dressed in a simple tank top and fatigue pants, her muscular arms and back glistening with a light sheen of sweat. She stood before a massive, reinforced metal plate, the kind used to test armor-piercing rounds. She wasn't using her fire. This was pure physical conditioning. She took a deep breath, her form perfect, and drove her fist into the center of the plate. The sound was like a church bell being struck by a battering ram. A deep, resonant bong echoed through the yard, and a visible ripple went through the half-inch thick steel. A small, fist-sized dent was left behind. Naruto leaned against the doorframe, watching. She was strong. In his world, she'd have been a prime candidate for Tsunade's tutelage. But he saw the slight hesitation. The minute check she put on her power at the last possible second. It was the ingrained habit of someone who had been told, over and over, to hold back. She seemed to sense him, turning with the swiftness of a trained soldier. Her initial guardedness softened when she saw who it was. Uzumaki, she said, her tone formal. Naruto is fine, he replied, walking forward. He gestured to the dented plate. That's impressive. Most shinobi I know couldn't hit that hard without using chakra. Maki wiped her brow with the back of her wrist, a hint of a proud smile touching her lips. Years of training in the army. My family has a long military tradition. Then, the smile faded slightly. They always told me to focus on my pyrokinetic skills, though. Said brute strength wasn't proper. They were wrong, Naruto said simply. The words were not flattery. They were a statement of fact, and they landed with the weight of one. Power is power. The type doesn't matter, only how you use it. You're holding back. Quote. Maki's eyes widened slightly. What? At the point of impact, he explained, stepping closer to the plate. He traced the edge of the dent with his chakra-formed fingers. You pull the force back. Just a little, instinctively. Why? She looked away, her gaze distant. When I was younger, I broke things. Got into fights. Boys would challenge me, trying to prove they were stronger. They always regretted it. I was told I was intimidating. Too much. Gorilla Cyclops, they called me. She said the last part with a practiced, self-deprecating humor, but Naruto heard the old sting beneath it. Idiots, he said, his voice flat. He tapped the plate. Strength like this isn't intimidating. It's reliable. It's a shield for people who can't protect themselves. Anyone who tells you otherwise is either weak or afraid. Don't ever apologize for it. He met her eyes, his own as clear and blue as a summer sky. You want to hit harder. I can show you how to focus your intent, not just your muscle. To drive the force all the way through. Maki stared at him, her heart doing a strange, unfamiliar flutter. He didn't see a monster. He saw a guardian. He saw her strength and, instead of being scared of it, he offered to make it even greater. Okay, she heard herself say, her voice softer than she intended. Show me. Meanwhile, Tamaki Kotatsu was trying to mop the main hall floor. A task made infinitely more difficult by her own body. Her mop handle snagged on a stray cable, which in turn pulled a stack of maintenance reports off a desk, which then dominoed into a crate of cleaning supplies. Culminating in her slipping on a bar of soap and landing in a heap, her uniform once again in a state of disarray. This curse is going to be the death of me, she mumbled into the floorboards. Utterly defeated. It's not a curse. She looked up. Naruto was standing there, holding out a hand to help her up. She took it, her skin tingling at the contact. He pulled her to her feet with an ease that belied his lean frame. As before, he didn't comment on her state of dress, simply waiting for her to right herself. What do you mean? She asked, hastily buttoning her jacket. In my world, we have something called chakra. It's energy. It flows through the body in pathways. Sometimes, those pathways can get blocked or twisted. It can cause unforeseen side effects, he explained, his expression thoughtful. This lucky lecher lure of yours. It doesn't feel like bad luck. It feels like your own energy, your life force, spiking unpredictably. It's like a faulty circuit. It shorts out and affects the world around you in small ways. Makes things catch, slip, or pull when they shouldn't. Tamaki looked at him, flabbergasted. For years, she'd been told it was a curse, a gag. A cosmic joke at her expense. Priests had tried exorcisms. She'd been mocked and pitied. He was the first person to look at it like a technical problem. Can it be fixed? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. Maybe not fixed, but it could be controlled, he said. He held up his palm, and a small, calm ball of blue chakra swirled into existence. It was not the violent, grinding power of a Rasengan, but a placid, gentle sphere of light. The first step to controlling any power is learning to feel it. Sit down. Close your eyes. Try to feel the energy inside you. Not the heat of your fire, but the warmth of your own life. Find its center. Hesitantly, she did as he asked. She sat cross-legged on the floor she was supposed to be mopping, and closed her eyes. It was the strangest training she'd ever received. But as she focused, following his calm, patient instructions, for the first time in her life, she felt it. A faint, twitchy energy, separate from her ignition ability, buzzing just beneath her skin. And for the first time, she felt a flicker of something she hadn't felt in years: hope. In the pristine, white and gold headquarters of Special Fire Force Company 5. The air was cold and smelled of antiseptic and arrogance. Princess Hibana, captain and self-proclaimed queen of her domain, sat on a high-backed chair that was less furniture and more a throne. Her expression was one of sublime irritation as she reviewed a battlefield report on her tablet. A subordinate stood rigidly beside her, sweating under her imperious gaze. "Explain this to me again," Hibana said, her voice a silken purr that promised pain. "But use small words, as if you're speaking to an absolute imbecile." "Because that's what I feel like for having to ask." "Ma'am," the man stammered. The 8th engaged a demon-class infernal. Their projected success rate was less than 10%. But then, an unknown appeared. "I'm aware of the unknown." She flicked a dismissive hand. "The part I'm failing to grasp is the description of his ability." He extinguished a plasma torrent with a sphere of wind. Extinguished. Fire is a chemical reaction. It requires fuel, oxygen, and heat. You can smother it, you can cool it. You do not extinguish a self-sustaining plasma reaction with wind. She sneered. "Wind, in fact, tends to feed a flame. It's elementary science. But that's what the eyewitnesses reported, ma'am. And the analysis of the aftermath, the infernal wasn't put to rest. It wasn't turned to ash. Its upper torso was gone. Obliterated. Subatomic disintegration." According to the preliminary notes from the second S lab, Hibana's manicured finger stopped scrolling. Subatomic disintegration. That was not fire. That was not heat. That was a fundamental violation of the principles she had built her entire career on. Her world was divided into the powerless, gravel, and the powerful pyrokinetics who commanded the holy flame. This was something else. A new variable in an equation she thought she had solved. Her eyes, the color of amethysts with flecks of burning passion, narrowed. An unclassified, undocumented power user, capable of negating combustion and inducing matter dissolution, is now in the custody of that band of sentimental misfits at the 8th. The thought was galling. It was an insult. A creature of such profound scientific interest, such unprecedented potential, was being wasted on Akitoru Obi's bleeding heart brigade. He should be here, in her lab, on her table, under her microscope. "This is unacceptable," she declared, standing up with a fluid, predatory grace. Her pink jacket swayed around her. A phenomenon of this magnitude cannot be left in the hands of glorified Boy Scouts. He is not a person, he is a living scientific anomaly. He is Subject Zero. She smiled, a slow, cruel curve of her lips. "And I am going to collect my specimen." She turned to her elite squad, the ones fanning her and attending to her every whim. "Gear up. We're paying a visit to the 8th. Bring the reinforced restraints and a high-yield tranquilizer. I want him alive, and I want him cooperative." The arrival of Company 5's vanguard was not subtle. 3 armored vehicles screeched to a halt outside the 8th's cathedral, and a dozen soldiers in the pristine white and gold uniforms of the 5th disembarked with military precision. They were led by 2 of Hibana's most sycophantic and capable lieutenants. By order of Captain Princess Hibana of Company 5, the lead man shouted, his voice amplified by a bullhorn. "We are here to take custody of the unregistered power user currently residing on these premises. Surrender him immediately." Inside, Company 8 scrambled. "What in the hell does she think she's doing?" Obi growled, grabbing his jacket. "Standard Hibana power play," Hinawa said dryly, already monitoring them on the security cameras. "She sees a shiny new toy and wants to take it apart to see how it works." Naruto, who had been in the middle of his conversation with Tamaki, stood up. "They're here for me. You're not going anywhere," Maki said, stepping in front of him, her stance wide and protective. The rest of the 8th formed a loose line behind her. Naruto appreciated the gesture, but this wasn't their fight. And frankly, it wasn't much of a fight at all. "It's fine," he said, his voice calm. "Let me handle this. I don't want anyone getting hurt over me." Quote. Before Obi could object, Naruto walked to the large cathedral doors and pushed them open. He stepped out into the courtyard, blinking in the hazy sunlight, and faced the assembled soldiers. You the one they call Subject Zero? The lieutenant sneered, looking Naruto up and down. You don't look like much. That's not my name, Naruto said, his hands in his pockets. And you should probably leave. You're not going to get what you came for. The lieutenant laughed. Brave words. Let's see if you can back them up. Subdue him. The squad from the 5th moved as one. 4 of them were 3rd gens. And flames erupted from their hands and feet. They lunged, confident in their numbers and their power. Naruto sighed. He brought his hands together in the cross seal. Shadow clone jutsu. With a dozen silent puffs of smoke, an equal number of Naruto clones appeared. The attack from the 5th faltered in confusion. What followed was not a battle, it was a clinical disassembly. Each clone engaged one soldier. They didn't use Rasengans or any flashy techniques. They just used pure, efficient taijutsu. A clone sidestepped a jet of flame and swept the soldier's legs out from under him. Another blocked a fire-enhanced punch with his forearm, spun, and applied a gentle but irresistible chokehold until the man went limp. A third disarmed a soldier of her flam. Axe with 2 precise taps to her wrist and elbow, then used her own belt to tie her hands behind her back. The entire confrontation lasted less than 30 seconds. The courtyard was littered with the groaning, restrained bodies of Company 5's elite squad. The original Naruto hadn't moved from his spot. He hadn't even taken his hands out of his pockets. The remaining members of Company 8, who had been prepared for a fierce firefight, simply stared from the doorway. Well, Arthur commented to a stunned Shinra. That was efficient. Naruto looked at the mess, then his eyes drifted past the vehicles towards the gleaming white tower of Company 5's headquarters in the distance. This wasn't going to stop here. She would just send more. There was only one way to deal with a bully. He turned to a clone. Clean this up. Don't hurt them. Just pile them neatly. The clone gave a thumbs up and got to work. Then, Naruto turned back towards the city. I'll be right back, he said to the dumbfounded members of the 8th. Where are you going? Obi demanded. To have a word with their princess. And then he was gone, a flicker of orange that vanished down the street with a gust of wind. Prince S.S. Hibana was enjoying a cup of ridiculously expensive tea in her top-floor laboratory, observing the city below like a queen surveying her kingdom. Her lab was a marvel of clean lines, gleaming chrome, and bubbling beakers. All dedicated to her singular obsession, understanding the nature of fire and power. She expected a call from her lieutenants any moment, reporting the successful capture of Subject Zero. Her teacup rattled. She looked up, annoyed at the disturbance. Standing in the center of her laboratory, having bypassed floors of armed guards, electronic locks, and motion sensors, was the blonde-haired young man from the report. He was dusting off his jacket, looking around her pristine lab with mild curiosity. Hibana froze, teacup halfway to her lips. Her mind raced, unable to compute. How? The security on this level was absolute. No one got in without her explicit permission. Your Princess Hibana, I take it? Naruto asked, his voice casual. He walked over to a complex diagram of infernal energy signatures she had scrawled on a massive glass board. Interesting theory. You think the soul's emotional state at the moment of combustion determines the infernal's power level. You're not wrong. But you're missing a piece. It's not just their emotion. It's the resonance with an external energy source. Hibana slammed her cup down, tea sloshing over the saucer. The sheer audacity. He had infiltrated her sanctum, bypassed her authority, and was now critiquing her life's work as if he were a visiting professor. Who in the name of so do you think you are? She hissed, her eyes blazing with violet fury. How did you get in here? I'll have you flayed for this insolence. The front door was too much trouble, Naruto said, still studying the board. He turned to face her, his expression finally losing its mildness and turning serious. I'm the one you sent your men to kidnap. They failed, so I came to tell you to your face. Stop. I'm not your subject, and I'm not your specimen. I'm a person, and I don't like people who try to put my friends in danger. Hibana laughed, a high, sharp sound of disbelief. Friends. You've known that pack of mongrels for a day. And you dare make demands of me. You are gravel. You are dirt beneath my feet, no matter what little parlor tricks you can do. She raised a hand, and the air around her began to shimmer with heat. She was a third general of immense power, able to create and control heat to a masterful degree. A flick of her wrist, and she could create flowers of fire, beautiful and deadly. I created this company. I am power. You are just an anomaly to be studied. Now you will learn your place. A delicate, beautiful cherry blossom made of pure, pink-hued flame bloomed in the air between them. It was her signature attack, capable of inflicting horrific, precise burns. Naruto just looked at it. He didn't move. He didn't brace. He just watched it float towards him. The blossom touched his chest, and for a split second, Hibana smiled in triumph. The smile died. The flame blossom didn't burn him. It just fizzled. A faint wisp of orange-gold chakra, no brighter than a candle flame, had coated the front of his jacket, and her fire, upon contact, was simply snuffed out, starved of whatever it needed to exist. It was like throwing a lit match into a vacuum. Hibana's jaw dropped. He hadn't dodged it. He hadn't blocked it. He had nullified it. Power isn't about rank, or how many people you can order around, Naruto said, his voice dropping low, his blue eyes boring into hers. For the first time, she felt a live awe of something she hadn't felt in years, fear. This man's presence was immense. It was like standing at the foot of a mountain that had just decided to talk to you. True power is about what you protect. Before their battle of wills could escalate, a klaxon began to blare, a shrill, piercing sound that cut through the tension. Red lights flashed, washing the white lab in a bloody glow. What is it? Hibana snapped into her wrist calm. White clad. It's a coordinated attack. A panicked voice screamed back. They're everywhere. They're targeting the labs and the sisters' dormitory. Oh, God, the children. Hibana's blood ran cold. The dormitory was attached to her facility, a place for the orphaned children of firefighters and the nuns who cared for them. A place she secretly funded and protected. The wall of her lab exploded inward. Shrapnel and glass flew everywhere. Naruto moved in a blur. He appeared in front of Hibana, a shimmering, translucent wall of chakra appearing from his arm to block the debris. He didn't even flinch as chunks of concrete shattered against his barrier. Through the hole stood a man in the white, hooded robes of the evangelist's fanatics. He was tall, carried a massive, wickedly sharp scythe, and his eyes glowed with a sadistic light. Behind him, more white clads poured into the building, their laughter mingling with the screams from below. The witch of the fifth, the lead man, Karen, rasped, his voice like grinding stone. The evangelist sends her regards. Your blasphemous research ends today. All will be returned to the great flame. Hibana's forces, caught by surprise, were already being overwhelmed. Explosions rocked the building. Get the sisters out of here. She roared into her calm, her professional fury taking over. She turned to Naruto, her previous animosity forgotten in the face of the immediate, horrific threat. If you're half as powerful as you think you are, prove it. Naruto didn't need to be told. He was already moving. He formed a quick seal. Multi-shadow clone jutsu. The lab filled with 100 Narutos. Go. He commanded his duplicates. Protect the civilians. Get everyone out. I'll handle the welcome party. The clones swarmed out of the lab, a tide of orange and black that descended through the burning building. Hibana watched, utterly stunned, as they began organizing a mass evacuation with impossible speed and efficiency. They formed human chains, carried children two at a time, and shielded the terrified nuns with their own bodies. Naruto, the real one, turned to Karen. Your fight is with me. The battle was brief and brutal. Karen was powerful, his side wreathed in black flames. He was fast, deadly, and utterly devoted to his cause. He was also completely outmatched. Naruto moved around his attacks as if they were in slow motion, his sage mode predicting every swing. He didn't need a Rasenshuriken here. A series of precise, chakra-enhanced strikes disabled the man's arms and legs. But the building was collapsing. A huge explosion from below sent a shockwave upwards, and the ceiling above the dormitory wing began to groan. A massive section of concrete and steel broke free, plunging down towards a group of nuns ushering the last of the children out. Hibana screamed, her power useless against tons of falling rubble. She saw a flash of gold. Naruto appeared beneath the falling debris. He didn't try to stop it. He turned his back to it, raised his arms, and a massive, nine-pronged construct of crimson energy, the claws of the Kyuubi, erupted from his back, catching the tons of rubble with a deafening crack. He stood there, a human shield, his legs braced, the ground cracking beneath his feet. The crimson chakra, raw and terrifyingly potent, held the devastation at bay, allowing the last of the civilians to scramble to safety. Fire and sparks rained down on him, but he didn't even flinch. She saw the burns on his back and arms begin to steam and heal before her very eyes, the skin knitting itself back together in seconds. Once everyone was clear, he let the crimson chakra dissipate and allowed the rubble to crash into the empty space. He turned, his gaze epping over the children to ensure they were safe. Then his eyes met Hibana's. In that moment, her entire worldview shattered. Her arrogance, her obsession with her own power, her cynical view of the world as gravel and elites, it all crumbled to dust. She had just witnessed a power that dwarfed her own, a power she had mistaken for a parlor trick. And she had seen it used not for dominance, not for destruction, but with a singular, unwavering purpose: to protect the innocent. He had taken a blow meant for them, shielding them with his own body, with that monstrous, terrifying red energy. He walked over to the defeated Karen. The white clad was staring at him, his face a mask of pure terror. What are you?" Karen whispered, trembling. "That red light, it felt like a sun, but a sun of rage. It is not the holy flame of Adala." Naruto's eyes hardened, and for a second, they shifted, his pupils becoming sharp vertical slits. His voice dropped, laced with the barest hint of Kurama's growl. "We are the ones who hunt things like you in the dark." He tapped the man on the forehead, and Karen's eyes rolled back as he fell unconscious. The battle was over. The white-clad were either captured or had fled. The fires were being handled by the combined forces of the 5th and the newly arrived 8th. The building was a wreck, but thanks to Naruto's clones, there wasn't a single casualty among the civilians or her subordinates. Hibana stood amidst the wreckage of her lab, her pristine uniform smudged with soot. Naruto walked back in, his tattered jacket singed, but otherwise unharmed. He looked at her, his expression no longer challenging, just tired. "Are you okay?" She couldn't speak for a moment. She, Princess Hibana, who commanded legions with a word, was speechless. You saved them," she finally managed, her voice uncharacteristically soft. "All of them. It's what I do," he said again. It wasn't a boast. It was the simplest, most honest truth in his world, and now, in hers. Her scientific curiosity, her arrogance, it was all being replaced by a far more potent, far more confusing emotion. Fascination. Intense, overwhelming fascination. This man was not a subject. He was a force of nature. A whirlwind of power with the heart of a guardian. He was an equation she desperately, suddenly, needed to solve not by dissecting it, but by understanding it. "Naruto Uzumaki," she said, testing his name on her tongue. "You are a problem." But the words held no heat, only a grudging, profound respect. In a dark, cavernous space, lit only by the faint, pulsing glow of an Adala rift, the being known as the Seraph stood motionless. His featureless silver mask betrayed no emotion as the terrified, beaten form of Karen knelt before him. "It was not flame," Karen stammered. His body racked with tremors. It was an energy of pure life. And the red light, the rage, it was an antithesis. A shadow of a foreign sun, a power not born of our great flame. The Seraph remained silent for a long time. His head was tilted as if listening to a voice no one else could hear, the whispers of the evangelist from across the veil. He had watched the entire battle through Karen's eyes. He had seen the clones. He had seen the crimson chakra of the Nine Tails. He had felt the sheer, overwhelming life force that was Naruto Uzumaki. His original assessment had been correct. This was an anomaly, but it was far more dangerous than he had imagined. This was not a misplaced pillar or a rogue pyrokinetic. This was an outside factor. A piece from an entirely different game placed upon their board. Such a thing could not be allowed to exist. It threatened the holy prophecy, the sacred union of the great cataclysm. "You have done well, Karen," the Seraph's voice was like the chiming of funereal bells. Cold and melodic. "You have shown me the nature of the heresy." He placed a hand on Karen's head. "The evangelist's grace is absolute. It rewards the faithful and purifies the unclean. A flash of white fire erupted from the seraph's hand. Karen screamed for a second, then went silent, his body turning to fine, white ash that scattered on the stone floor. The seraph looked towards the distant, hidden rift. The evangelist was hungry. It was also afraid. This new power was something it recognized, something ancient and antithetical to its own existence. The anomaly cannot be understood. The seraph said to the darkness. It cannot be converted. It is a blasphemy to the truth of Adala. He clenched his fist, and the air around it seemed to warp, the light bending. Indirect observation is over. I will be its final judgment. I will unmake this foreign sun myself. Chapter 2 End. Chapter 3. The Price of Power. The air in the grand cathedral of the Holy Saul Temple was thick with the scent of old stone, incense, and simmering hostility. Light struggled through stained glass windows depicting beatific saints wrestling with fiery demons, casting long, judgm. Ental shadows across the cavernous space. At the center of the hall, a circular table of polished obsidian reflected the stern faces of the 8 captains of the Special Fire Force. At the head of it all, elevated on a gilded platform, sat Raffles III, the pontiff of the Saul Temple, his face a mask of pious concern that barely concealed a viper's cunning. Naruto stood in the center of the room, a lone figure in orange and black. He wasn't restrained, but the ring of white-robed temple guardsmen, their hands resting on the pommels of their ceremonial flame blades, made the intention clear. He was a prisoner on trial. Company 8 stood a few paces behind him, a silent, defiant bastion of support. Captain Obi's arms were crossed, his jaw set like granite. Hinawa's gaze was sharp, missing nothing. Maki, Tamaki, and even Shinra and Arthur looked ready to explode into action at a moment's notice. To everyone's surprise, Princess Hibana and her retinue from Company 5 had taken a position near the 8th, not with the other captains. Her expression was one of bored neutrality, but her eyes, whenever they flickered towards Naruto, held a sharp, proprietary glint. This body has been convened to address the anomaly designated Uzumaki Naruto, the pontiff began, his voice echoing with practiced sanctimony. A being of unknown origin, wielding a power that is not of the Holy Soul's divine flame. A power that has been described as heretical and blasphemous. Captain Leonard Burns of Company 1, a mountain of a man with an eye patch and an aura of immense, contained power, spoke first. His voice was a low rumble. He is an unquantifiable combat asset. My interest is in his capabilities and his allegiance. Nothing more. Captain Gustav Honda of the 2nd, a man whose weary face spoke of 1,000 battles, sighed. He saved District 7. My men were there. He prevented a catastrophic loss of life. That should count for something. It counts for a great deal, a smooth, oily voice interjected. All eyes turned to a man seated beside the pontiff, a civilian in a sharp, ridiculously expensive suit. This was Gureo Hijima, the president of Hijima Industries, the corporate behemoth that designed and manufactured nearly all of the Fire Force's technology. His smile didn't reach his cold, calculating eyes. It counts for the fact that we have a living weapon of untold potential on our hands. Hijima Industries believes this potential must be studied, quantified, and controlled for the good of the Tokyo Empire. Studied. Obi's voice cut through the air like a whip. You mean vivisected. We all know what happens to unique pyrokinetics that Hijima takes an interest in. They disappear into your labs and are never seen again. Hijima's smile tightened. We are on the verge of a new age, Captain Obi. The second great cataclysm is not a matter of if, but when. We must be prepared to use any and all weapons at our disposal. This creature could be the key to our survival, or our destruction, if left unchecked. He turned his gaze to Naruto, his expression like a butcher eyeing a prize-winning hog. Tell me, boy, where does this power of yours come from? Is it a gift from a god? And if so, which god? Because it is certainly not ours. Naruto met his gaze without flinching. His sage mode was humming, feeding him a constant stream of information. The pontiff's piety was a lie, a thin veneer over a core of grasping ambition. The Hijima president was worse. His soul was a cold, empty ledger, valuing everything and respecting nothing. He could feel the greed radiating from the man, a palpable hunger for his power. My power is my own, Naruto said, his voice calm and clear, carrying easily across the vast hall. It's not a gift from anyone. I earned it. Arrogance. A captain from a minor temple loyalist company snapped. You stand in the heart of the Sol Temple and deny the source of all power. I'm not denying your god, Naruto replied, his gaze sweeping over the captains. I'm just telling you he has nothing to do with me. My only goal here has been to keep people from dying. From turning into those things you call infernals. I stopped a demon, I saved civilians. And I protected children from those white-clad fanatics. If that's a crime in your empire, then your empire is already lost. The sheer, unshakable confidence in his voice gave them pause. He wasn't pleading. He wasn't negotiating. He was stating his truth, and he didn't care if they believed it or not. Gureo Hijima sneered. Lofty words from a stray dog. You speak of protection, yet you yourself are the greatest danger. An uncontrolled, undocumented power source walking our streets. You are a natural disaster waiting to happen. For the safety of everyone, you must be contained. He looked to the pontiff. Hijima Industries formally requests custody. The Holy Sol Temple supports this motion, Raffles III declared. He will be taken for consecration and study. The temple guardsmen shifted, their hands tightening on their weapons. Company 8 tensed, ready to fight. The air crackled with imminent violence. I think not. The voice was cool, arrogant, and utterly dismissive. Princess Hibana rose from her seat. A picture of languid grace. She sauntered forward, her pink jacket swaying. Subject, that is, Mr. Uzumaki, she corrected herself with a smirk, is a once-in-a-generation phenomenon. His unique bioenergy, which seems to operate in opposition to standard combustion, could be the very key to understanding the nature of Adala and preventing the next cataclysm. She gave Hijima a look of pure contempt. Handing him over to your corporate butchers to be dismantled for weapons manufacturing would be the single most monumentally stupid act of scientific vandalism in the history of this empire. And I will not permit it. She came to a stop, not beside Naruto, but slightly in front of him, a subtle but unmistakable gesture of protection. He is currently under my official scientific observation, in joint custody with the 8th. Any attempt to interfere will be considered an act of aggression against Special Fire Force Company 5. And I assure you, President Hijima, my fire burns much hotter than your quarterly profits. A stunned silence followed. Hibana, the arrogant, self-serving witch, was defending him. Defending the 8th. The political landscape of the room had just been fractured. Benimaru Shinman, the captain of Company 7, who had been leaning back in his chair looking utterly bored, let out a short, sharp laugh. This is getting interesting. All eyes turned to the strongest fire soldier in the empire. The kid's a monster, that's for sure. But he's the white-clad's monster of a problem, not ours. And he makes the old men in the fancy hats nervous. He gave a lazy grin. I say let him be. It's more fun that way. The inquiry descended into chaos, a war of words between the factions. Naruto, the center of it all, remained silent. He watched Hibana, a flicker of surprise and something else, gratitude, in his eyes. She met his gaze for a split second and gave a tiny, almost imperceptible wink. The stalemate could not last. Gureo Hijima was not a man who took no for an answer. If politics and intimidation failed, he had other methods. 2 hours later, in the bustling Shinjuku commercial district, a reinforced transport container in a secure Hijima sublevel facility began to shake violently. The temperature inside skyrocketed. Alarms, which had been deliberately disabled, remained silent. A team of Hijima's private enforcers, clad in black combat gear, watched from a monitor. Subject 734 is reaching critical instability, one of them reported into a comm. The enhancement cocktail is working perfectly. Excellent. Hijima's voice replied from a speaker. Release it in Quadrant 4, near the main plaza. Make it look like it broke containment. And ensure the 8th's new pet is the first one to know about it. It's time we saw what this uncontrolled weapon does when faced with a real crisis. Let's give the people a reason to fear him. In the middle of the crowded plaza, a sewer grate exploded upwards on a pillar of fire. From the depths climbed a horror. It was another demon-class infernal, but this one was different. Its body was a churning vortex of white-hot fire, barely contained by a cage of blackened bones. Wires and chemical injectors, products of Hijima's labs, were fused into its flesh, pumping it full of accelerants. It was a weaponized soul, an engine of pure agony and destruction. And it had just been unleashed on a street packed with thousands of civilians. It let out a roar that shattered every window for 3 blocks and unleashed a wave of heat that melted cars into puddles of slag. Panic erupted. The crowd became a screaming, stampeding mob. The alarm reached the 8th Cathedral less than a minute later. Demon Class Infernal, Shinjuku Plaza. It's a bloodbath, Hinawa shouted, information streaming across his screens. Local fire crews are being vaporized. Let's go, Obi bellowed. They were already moving, but as they raced to their truck, Naruto held up a hand. There's no time for that. He grabbed Obi and Hinawa. Maki, who was closest, grabbed his arm. He extended a chakra arm and snagged Tamaki. Everyone, hang on to me or each other. Before they could question it, he activated the body flicker technique, but amplified it, pulling the others along with him in a miniature whirlwind of chakra and leaves. The world dissolved into a green blur. Less than 5 seconds later, they materialized on a rooftop overlooking the plaza. The sensory whiplash was staggering. They had traveled across half the city in the blink of an eye. The scene below was hell. The artificial demon was a whirlwind of white flame, incinerating everything it touched. What? How? Obi stammered, shaking his head to clear it. No time, Naruto said, his eyes already locked on the target. Maki, Tamaki, with me. Captain, you and the lieutenant coordinate the evacuation from here. Get those people clear. Before Obi could respond, Hibana and a squad from the 5th arrived on an adjacent rooftop. Having likely followed them at top speed. Don't think you get to have all the fun, Gravel. She shouted, though there was no malice in it. My company will secure the perimeter. Try not to destroy what's left of the district. Naruto gave her a sharp nod of acknowledgement. Maki, I need a shield. Tamaki, I need you to draw its fire. Got it, Maki yelled, leaping from the rooftop. She landed with a ground-shaking thud, her iron owls already forming, swirling into a massive, interlocking wall of defensive flame to protect a group of trapped civilians. Tamaki hesitated for a second, her old insecurities flaring. Draw its fire. But what if my lure? Naruto put a hand on her shoulder. I'm not asking you to be a decoy. I'm asking you to be a fire soldier. You have the speed. You have the power. Trust your training. Trust me. He looked her in the eye, his belief in her absolute. Be a whirlwind. Distract it. Something in his gaze clicked for her. He wasn't using her curse. He was trusting her skill. She took a deep breath, flames erupting around her hands and feet in the shape of twin tails and cat ears, her Nekomata ability. Right, she shot off the roof like a rocket. A fast-moving target of pink-tinged fire, her attacks harassing the demon's flank, forcing it to turn its attention away from the panicked crowds. Naruto closed his eyes. The world fell away, and he sank into the calm stillness of nature. He drew in the energy of the world, the faint, struggling life force of the trees in a distant park, the hum of the city, the collective will of the people fighting for their lives. The golden pigment around his eyes deepened, spreading across his eyelids. His pupils became horizontal bars. A cloak of brilliant, golden-yellow chakra erupted around him, flowing like liquid fire but radiating no heat. He floated a few inches off the ground, the very air around him humming with immense, sacred power. 6 Paths Sage Mode. To the people below, to Hibana, to Obi, to the Hijima agents watching on a hidden camera, it looked as though a small sun had just been born on the rooftop. The golden god that was now Naruto Uzumaki didn't speak. He simply vanished. He appeared directly in front of the artificial demon. The creature, sensing a power that dwarfed its own, unleashed its full fury, a concentrated beam of white-hot energy that could have bored a hole through a mountain. Naruto didn't try to block it or shred it. He raised a hand, and 9 small, black spheres, no bigger than baseballs, materialized behind him, arranging themselves in a halo. They were the truth-seeking orbs, matter forged from all 5 elemental natures and yin-yang release. They were the power to nullify all creation. He sent one orb forward. It drifted lazily into the path of the beam. The instant the white-hot plasma touched the orb, it ceased to exist. Not with a bang, but a whimper. The beam was simply erased, nullified at the point of contact. The black sphere didn't even slow down. It continued its path and touched the demon's chest. There was no explosion, no sound, no shockwave. The demon infernal, a being of immense, artificially enhanced power, simply dissolved. A sphere of absolute nothingness expanded from the point of contact, turning the raging fire, the blackened bones, the fused metal, all of it, into nothing more than motes of dust that drifted away on the wind. The process was so clean, so absolute, that the air where the demon had been was momentarily cold, a vacuum where a sun had just been. It was over. The plaza fell silent, the only sound the distant sirens and the crackling of secondary fires. Naruto floated in the air for a moment, his golden cloak of chakra slowly receding. He landed softly on the scorched asphalt, his normal appearance returning. Though his eyes still held a faint golden trace, the sheer, surgical precision of the act was more terrifying than any explosion. He hadn't just destroyed the monster. He had unwritten it from the book of existence. Gureo Hijima, watching on his monitor from miles away, felt a cold sweat bead on his forehead. The blood drained from his face. This was not a weapon to be controlled. This was not a resource to be exploited. This was a god, an alien god, walking among them in the guise of a man. And he had just tried to poke it with a stick. For the first time in his life, Gureo Hijima was afraid. The sun began to set, painting the smoke-filled sky in hues of orange and bruised purple. The cleanup was underway, but the four of them had found their way to the same rooftop they had started on. A silent, mutual agreement. Naruto, Maki, Tamaki, and Hibana stood together, looking out over the scarred but saved plaza. The adrenaline was gone, replaced by a bone. Deep weariness and the lingering tension of the political firestorm they knew was coming. "They're not going to stop," Maki said, her voice low. She was staring at her hands, which were trembling slightly. "Hijima, the temple, they'll be more afraid of you than ever now." "Let them be," Hibana scoffed, though her voice lacked its usual bite. She was leaning against the rooftop ledge, her arms crossed. She couldn't take her eyes off Naruto. She had replayed that moment in her mind 100 times already. The golden light, the black spheres, the silent, absolute erasure. Her scientific mind was short-circuiting. It was magic. It was divinity. It was beautiful and terrifying. Fear is a tool. We can use it. Tamaki was sitting on the ground, hugging her knees. She looked up at Naruto, her eyes shining with an emotion she couldn't name. "You told me to trust you. And I did. I wasn't useless." For the first time, her nekomata hadn't felt like a clumsy accident. It had felt like an extension of her will. Naruto looked at them, at these three incredibly different, incredibly strong women who had, without hesitation, stood with him. Maki, the unshakable shield. Tamaki, the whirlwind of surprising grace. Hibana, the arrogant queen who had swallowed her pride to defend him. In his old world, he had fought for everyone, for a village that had once shunned him. He had fought for a dream. Here, in this strange, burning world, he was an outcast all over again. But this time, he wasn't alone. "Thank you," he said, his voice quiet but full of profound, genuine emotion. "All of you, for standing with me, at the inquiry, and just now. You didn't have to." "Yes, we did," Maki said, her gaze firm and unwavering. "Company 8 looks after its own. You're one of us now, Naruto." Hibana pushed off the ledge, walking over to stand beside him. She looked out at the city. "Don't get the wrong idea, Gravel," she said softly, not looking at him. "I simply made a strategic investment. It would be illogical to let a rival corporation acquire such a valuable asset." But her words were hollow, a flimsy shield for the truth. She had seen him protect her children. She had seen him become a golden god to protect strangers. Her investment was no longer just strategic. It was personal. Tamaki stood up and, in a moment of pure bravery that outshone anything she'd done in the fight, walked over and gently took his hand. It was his real one, the flesh and blood one. "You're the first person who ever looked at my curse and saw potential instead of a punchline. You're the first person to make me feel strong." He looked down at her hand in his, then at Maki's steady presence, then at Hibana's defiant posture. In this world of soot and sorrow, in the face of greedy corporations and fanatical cults, he had found his people. They were a fractured, unlikely alliance, but here, on this rooftop, they were a unit. It was them against the world. And for the first time since he'd been torn from his reality, Naruto Uzumaki felt the faint, blossoming warmth of something that felt like home. A bond forged not of politics or duty, but of shared defiance and mutual respect. A foundation had been laid, solid as the earth, and something new and powerful was about to be built upon it. Unseen by any of them, a figure watched from the deepest shadows of a building a block away. The Seraph had felt the ripple of Naruto's six-path sage mode, the brief but absolute assertion of a power that screamed blasphemy. He had seen the truth-seeking orbs and understood. This was not just an energy. It was a conceptual power. The power to create and to erase. This was the kind of power that rewrote truth. It was a direct, existential threat to the evangelist's own truth, the one that said all of creation must return to the great flame. He had orchestrated the inquiry. He had whispered in Hijima's ear through a proxy, suggesting the release of the enhanced infernal. It was all a test, a way to gauge the anomaly's limits. The results were more spectacular and more horrifying than he could have imagined. The Seraph turned away, melting back into the shadows. The time for tests was over. The time for games was over. This anomaly could not be isolated or contained by the petty powers of this world. It had to be confronted directly. And the perfect place for such a confrontation was a place W. Here the veil between worlds was already thin. A place of echoes and madness. The Nether. Chapter 3 End. Chapter 4. Echoes in the Nether. The entrance to the Nether was a scar on the face of Tokyo, a agged wound in the earth that bled shadows. It was a place where subway tunnels had collapsed during the Great Cataclysm, where forgotten infrastructure had been twisted into a labyrinthine mockery of civilization. The air that wafted up from its depths was cold, smelling of damp earth, decay, and something else, something that felt like old, lingering madness. Shinra's link was specific, Hinawa said, his voice a low, tense murmur in the oppressive quiet. The assembled members of Company 8, along with Naruto, stood at the precipice, the weak light of their helmet lamps barely pushing back the encroaching darkness. A deep-level congregation point. The white clads are attempting a ritual to awaken a new pillar. We go in, disrupt the ritual, and get out. Stealth is paramount. Stealth Goes out the window the second Arthur opens his mouth, Shinra muttered, earning him a glare from the self-proclaimed knight. Naruto wasn't listening to their banter. He stood at the edge of the chasm, his eyes closed. His six-path sage mode active but subdued, a faint golden trace around his eyes. This place was a cacophony. In the world above, the lingering energy of burned souls was a faint, sad static. Here, it was a roar. The stone walls seemed to weep with the agony of those consumed by flame, the very air thick with psychic residue. It was 1,000 times worse than sensing the raw, focused hatred of the tailed beasts in the war. This was pure, undiluted suffering, and it was clawing at the edges of his mind. Kurama, you were right. This place stinks. Stinks. It's a psychic cesspool, the great fox grumbled from within. The natural energy is so twisted it's barely recognizable. It's like this whole dimension has a festering wound, and we're about to crawl inside it. I'll keep the worst of it off you, but stay sharp. Something down here feels hungry. I can lead, Naruto said, opening his eyes. He looked at Obi. My senses are better suited for this. I can feel out the tunnels, detect enemies. Avoid cave-ins before they happen. Obi nodded, his face grim. You've got point. Maki, you're his rear guard. Everyone else, standard infiltration formation. Stay close, stay quiet, and for God's sake, don't touch anything that looks like it's glowing. They descended, a line of small lights swallowed by an immense darkness. The descent was unnerving. The path was a treacher. Ouse slope of rubble and twisted railway tracks. The silence was absolute, broken only by the crunch of their boots and the drip of unseen water. But for Naruto, it wasn't silent. It was a chorus of whispers, faint and sorrowful, echoing from the very stones. He pushed them away, focusing on the path ahead, on the living signatures of his team behind him. They moved through tunnels that seemed to defy geometry, passages that should have led west but somehow curved back to the north. Time seemed to lose meaning. After what felt like hours, they reached a vast, central cavern, a cathedral of shattered concrete and exposed earth. A dozen different tunnels branched off from it, each one a dark, yawning maw. The trail scatters here, Naruto said, his brow furrowed. The white clads, they split up. But the main group, the one with the high concentration of energy, went that way. He pointed to a low, narrow tunnel that looked particularly unstable. Suddenly, a low, grinding sound echoed through the cavern. The floor beneath them shuddered. A section of the ceiling, weakened and ancient, gave way. Tons of rock and earth came crashing down, splitting the cavern in two. Collapse, Obi yelled. The world became a storm of dust and noise. Naruto reacted on pure instinct. He grabbed the two people closest to him, Maki and Hibana, who had insisted on joining the mission with a small contingent. Claiming it was for observational purposes. He pulled them close, spinning them into a less than stable alcove as the cavern's geography was violently rewritten. He felt a flicker of other presences, Shinra's heat, Arthur's plasma. Tamaki's distinct energy signature, on the other side of the rockfall, along with Obi and Hinawa. When the dust settled, a solid wall of rock and earth, 10 meters thick, separated them. Everyone, sound off. Obi's voice crackled over the comms, tinny and distant. Shinra, here, I'm with Arthur and Tamaki. Hinawa and I are together. We're okay. Maki's voice was calm, professional. I'm with the captain of the 5th. And Naruto. We're uninjured. Damn it, Obi swore. The tunnel Naruto indicated is on your side. We're cut off. We'll try to find a way around. Mission objective is still the same. Find the ritual site. Be careful. Understood, Maki replied. The comms clicked off, leaving the three of them in a sudden, profound silence. The only light came from Hibana's high-tech helmet lamp and a soft, golden glow Naruto was consciously emitting from his hand. Hibana coughed, waving dust from her face. Well, this is just wonderful. Trapped in a sewer with the gravel and, you. She looked at Naruto, her expression a complex mix of annoyance and grudging reliance. We keep moving, Naruto said, his gaze already fixed on the dark tunnel. The others will be fine. We have our own part of the mission to complete. Maki nodded, her trust in him absolute. She hefted the massive iron cannon she used to launch her fire spirits. What are we facing? A handful of those white-clad soldiers, Naruto said, his senses stretching down the tunnel. And something else. Something that isn't alive. Not anymore. The tunnel was claustrophobic, forcing them to move in single file. Naruto led, his soft golden light a comforting presence against the oppressive dark. Maki followed, her senses sharp, covering their rear. Hibana was in the middle, her usual arrogance tempered by the unnerving environment. She found herself watching Naruto's back, the steady, confident set of his shoulders. The whispers grew louder here, more defined. They were no longer just sad, they were angry. Desperate. Let us out. It burns. Join us. Hibana shivered, wrapping her arms around herself. What is that sound? Echoes, Naruto said, not turning back. Of the people who burned. This place is close to where they went. It acts like an amplifier for their pain. They emerged into another cavern, this one stranger than the last. The walls were smooth, almost organic, and pulsed with a faint, sickly violet light. In the center of the room stood a figure. It was a man in the tattered remnants of a fire soldier's uniform, but his body was twisted, elongated. His head was thrown back, his mouth locked in a permanent, silent scream. He wasn't an infernal. He wasn't burning. He was just there. A statue of agony. What is he? Maki breathed, her weapon held at the ready. A guardian. A new voice echoed around them. From the shadows, 5 white-clad soldiers emerged, but they kept their distance. The one who spoke was their leader, a woman with a chillingly serene smile. He is one of the blessed who heard the evangelist's call but whose body was too weak to ascend. He remains here, forever, as a gatekeeper to the holy places. A silent witness to the truth of Adala. He's a torture victim you've repurposed as a scarecrow, Hibana spat, her scientific sensibilities offended by their religious dogma. The white-clad leader smiled. The guardian does not fight. But he shares his revelation. The silent figure in the center of the room suddenly convulsed. Its head snapped forward, its empty eye sockets fixing on them. A wave of invisible, Psychic force slammed into them. It wasn't a physical attack. It was mental. It was emotional. Hibana cried out, clutching her head as images flooded her mind. Her lab burning, the terrified faces of her sisters. The memory of being powerless, of being gravel. It was a targeted assault on her deepest fears and insecurities. Maki grunted, stumbling back. She was hit with a wave of profound inadequacy. The voices of her family telling her to be smaller, weaker. The faces of comrades she couldn't save in the army. The feeling of her strength being a curse, a wall that separated her from everyone else. Naruto staggered, a sharp gasp escaping his lips. For him, it was worse. The Guardian didn't just show him his fears, it was a conduit. A direct, unfiltered pipeline to the raw, screaming madness of Adala itself. His mind was violently ripped from the cavern, from his body, and thrown across a dimensional void. He was floating in a sea of fire and stars. Below him was a roiling, endless ocean of flame. Above, a black sky filled with countless, burning, accusing eyes. This was Adala, and in its center, he saw it. The Evangelist. It wasn't a person. It was a concept. A being of infinite, grasping hands and a singular, consuming hunger. A sentient black hole wearing a skin of fire. It was a parasite, feeding on the despair of the world it touched. And it saw him. The last time, it had been a glimpse. This time, it was a direct stare. The entity focused on his unique, alien soul, on the potent mix of human spirit, natural energy, and the raw, primal power of a tailed beast. It recognized the signature. It was not of this reality. It was a flavor it had tasted before, eons ago, from others who traveled the void between worlds. Otsutsuki. It recoiled, not in simple fear, but in a complex eruption of emotions that slammed into Naruto's mind. Shock, rage, and an overriding, all-consuming desire. It wanted him. It wanted to consume his power, to add this new, vibrant energy to its own. It was like a gourmand who had been eating ash his whole life suddenly smelling a feast. A psychic tendril of pure Adala energy, a lance of burning despair, shot across the void and pierced Naruto's consciousness. Back in the cavern, Naruto's body went rigid. His eyes, now glowing a furious, slitted red, snapped open. Kurama, feeling the direct assault on their shared soul, roared to the forefront. A cloak of crimson, bubbling chakra, thick as blood, erupted from Naruto, forming a single, massive tail that lashed out and shattered a nearby rock formation. "Get out of our head." Kurama's voice was not a thought, but a physical force that blasted outwards, a pure wave of willpower and rage. The psychic assault shattered. The Guardian in the center of the room smoked, then crumbled into dust. Its purpose fulfilled and its vessel overloaded. The white-clad stared in horror at the crimson-cloaked figure of Naruto, at the raw, demonic power he was exuding. This is not the holy flame. Their leader stammered. This is a true demon. Naruto, or rather the being that was now a fusion of Naruto and a furious Kurama, turned its slitted, red eyes on them. It didn't speak. It just raised a hand, and a miniature, dense Biju bomb, a sphere of positive and negative chakra compressed to an impossible degree, formed in its palm. Naruto, wait. Maki's voice cut through the haze of rage. She had pushed past her own psychic assault, her soldier's discipline winning out. She now stood between him and the white-clads, her hands up, not in a defensive posture, but an appeal. Hibana was on one knee, breathing heavily. But she too was looking at him, her eyes wide with a mixture of terror and awe. The red eyes focused on Maki. The raw killing intent, thick enough to choke on, receded slightly. The face of the woman before him, her expression not of fear for herself, but of concern for him, penetrated the rage. Kurama, back down. Naruto's own consciousness fought its way back to the surface. It's me. I'm okay. The crimson cloak wavered, then slowly receded back into his body. The Biju bomb in his hand dissipated with a fizzle. He staggered, falling to one knee, breathing heavily. The link to Adala was severed, but the echo of it, the taste of that all-consuming hunger, lingered. He had seen the enemy. Truly seen it, and it had seen him. The white-clads, seeing their chance, didn't press the attack. They turned and fled into the darkness. Let them go, Naruto gasped, pushing himself up. The ritual is this way. Maki rushed to his side, her hand hovering over his shoulder. unsure if she should touch him. "Are you all right?" "What was that?" "I'm fine," he lied, though his head was pounding. He looked at her, then at Hibana, who was now slowly getting to her feet, her usual composure shaken. He saw the lingering fear in their eyes. He had lost control. He had scared them. The thought was more painful than the psychic attack had been. "That thing," Hibana said, her voice unsteady. "It forced a connection. It showed me." She trailed off, unwilling to voice her deepest insecurities. "It feeds on fear and despair," Naruto said, his voice grim. "That's its power. That's how it grows." He looked at them, his expression raw and vulnerable. "It pulled me into its dimension. Adala. I saw it. The evangelist. It's a monster that wants to eat your whole world." They were in a dark, dangerous place. Hunted by fanatics and monsters. They had just survived a direct mental assault from a godlike entity. The tension was unbearable. In that moment of shared, harrowing experience, the walls between them crumbled. Hibana, the proud queen, looked not at a piece of gravel, but at a man who had stood on the precipice of madness with her. Maki, the stoic soldier, looked at a leader who was not invincible, but was fighting a battle far greater than she could comprehend. Naruto sank down, leaning against a rock wall, the adrenaline finally leaving him. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice low. "I lost control. That red energy, it's a part of me, but it's not always easy to manage. I didn't mean to scare you." Hibana surprised them both. She walked over and slid down the wall to sit beside him. Her usual personal space bubble completely forgotten. "For a monster, it has surprisingly good taste," she said, her voice a weak attempt at her usual sarcasm. "It saved my life upstairs." Maki sat down on his other side, her presence solid and reassuring. "You didn't scare me," she said softly. "It was a lie, but it was the lie he needed to hear. I was worried about you." The three of them sat there in silence for a long moment, huddled together in the faint golden light from Naruto's hand, a tiny island of warmth in the oppressive cold of the nether. The shared danger, the forced intimacy of the moment, had stripped away their masks. They were just three people, terrified and out of their depth, finding solace in each other's presence. "In my world," Naruto said, his voice barely a whisper. "I was alone for a long time. Everyone was afraid of the power inside me. They saw me as a monster." He looked at Maki, then at Hibana. "I lost everything when I came here. My home, my friends, everyone." He took a shaky breath. "But you too, Obi, Tamaki, all of the 8th, you're not afraid of me. You stood up for me. You're becoming my precious people in this world." The honesty of the admission, the raw vulnerability, was more powerful than any display of force. It was a crack in the armor of the demigod, revealing the lonely boy underneath. Hibana's heart, a fortress of ice and ambition, felt an unfamiliar, painful thaw. She had spent her life seeing people as tools or obstacles. But this man, who could shatter mountains, was confessing his loneliness to her in a sewer. She found her hand moving on its own, her fingers gently brushing against his. Maki, who had always been more comfortable with actions than words, simply leaned her head against his shoulder. A gesture of profound trust and comfort. Naruto felt the light touch of Hibana's fingers and the steady weight of Maki's head on his shoulder. After the screaming madness of Adala, these simple, human connections were an anchor. They were saving him just as much as he was protecting them. He turned his head slightly, his lips close to Hibana's. The air was charged with something new, omething that had nothing to do with fear or fighting. It was a fragile, tentative spark in the darkness. She didn't pull away. Her amethyst eyes, usually so sharp and critical, were soft and searching. He closed the small distance between them. The kiss was not passionate or demanding. It was hesitant, searching, a question and an answer all at once. It tasted of ozone, soot, and a shared, despair. Need for connection in a world of burning chaos. When they broke apart, breathless, his eyes met Maki's. Her face was unreadable, but her eyes held a deep, quiet understanding. He leaned towards her, and she met him halfway. Her lips firm and steady, a kiss that felt like coming home to a place you'd never been. It was a promise of strength, a vow of mutual support. It was a shared, powerful moment of finding solace in each other. A tripart harmony of souls amidst the hellscape of the nether. They were no longer just captain, soldier, and anomaly. They were something more, something new. A voice, cold and melodic as a funeral bell, echoed through the cavern, shattering the moment. It seemed to come from all directions at once. How touching. The anomaly finds companionship before its purification. The three of them shot to their feet, instantly on high alert. Naruto's sage mode flared, but he couldn't pinpoint the source. The voice was everywhere. You have gazed upon God, and God has found you wanting. The voice continued, dripping with a chilling, fanatical certainty. I am the instrument of that judgment. I am the will of the evangelist made manifest. The seraph. It was the cold, predatory presence he had sensed before. It wasn't watching from a distance anymore. It was here, with them. Show yourself. Naruto shouted, his voice ringing with power. The air in the center of the room began to warp, to shimmer like heat haze on a summer road. A figure resolved out of the darkness, coalescing as if from the shadows themselves. A tall, slender being in immaculate white robes, his face hidden by a featureless, polished silver mask. He didn't radiate heat, he radiated a profound, conceptual wrongness. I am the seraph, he said, his masked face turning towards Naruto. And you have gazed upon God. And God has found you wanting. Your existence is a blasphemy. I will be your final judgment. The race to stop the ritual had just become a race to survive. Chapter 4 End. Chapter 5. A vow forged in fire. The aftermath of the Nether mission was a bitter pill. They had successfully disrupted the ritual and prevented the birth of a new pillar, but the cost was a terrifying revelation. The enemy wasn't just a cult of fire worshippers, it was a cosmic horror from another dimension, and its chief agent in their world was a being who could walk through shadows and speak with the voice of Armageddon. Naruto's report, delivered with grim certainty to a private assembly of Captain Obi, Hinawa, and an unusually subdued Princess Hibana, painted a picture so dire it bordered on insanity. But the world cared little for cosmic horrors when a more convenient scapegoat was available. The Holy Saul Temple, already teetering on the edge of panic, seized on the narrative. The white-clad were a problem, yes. But they were a familiar one, heretics twisting the sacred flame. Naruto Uzumaki was something else entirely. He was alien. His power was a direct refutation of their faith. And now, thanks to whispers leaked by Hijima's far-reaching intelligence network, he was known to have a demonic, red energy and a psychic link to the enemy's dimension. The pontiff saw his chance to consolidate power. Fear was the most potent weapon in any religion's arsenal. Within a week, the official declaration was made, preached from every pulpit and plastered on every public terminal. The word of the temple was law. Naruto Uzumaki, the foreign blasphemy, was an agent of the same shadowy force as the white-clad, an antichrist sent to mock the Holy Saul and pave the way for a new cataclysm. He was a wolf in sheep's clothing, and his heroic acts were nothing but cunning deceptions. The tide of public opinion, so recently swayed by his acts of salvation, turned with brutal speed. Fear was a more powerful motivator than gratitude. To enforce the new dogma, the temple announced the formation of a new, elite holy task force, the Inquisitors. They were hand-picked from the most zealous members of the temple guard and the military police, their faith matched only by their cruelty. And thanks to a generous, anonymous donation from Hijima Industries, they were armed with cutting-edge technology. Not weapons of fire, but of suppression. Sonic cannons designed to disorient, grav plates that could increase local gravity tenfold, and their signature weapon, the chakra damper. A device that emitted a high-frequency energy field specifically tuned to disrupt non-pyrokinetic energy signatures. It was a weapon designed with only one target in mind. Their mandate was CMPLE and absolute. Capture Naruto Uzumaki by any means necessary. If capture was not possible, elimination was authorized. The siege began not with a bang, but with a quiet, suffocating stranglehold. One morning, the members of Company 8 awoke to find their cathedral surrounded. A 2-block perimeter had been established, manned by dozens of inquisitors in their stark white and gray combat gear, air silver masks reflecting the gloomy sky. They didn't attack, they just waited, watching, a silent, ever-present threat. The 8th's home had become their prison. This is untenable, Obi growled, airing out a reinforced window at the silent army below. I've been on the comms for hours. Burns is reviewing the situation. The other captains are citing the temple's authority and refusing to intervene. We're on our own. Not entirely. Hibana's voice drawled from the doorway. She had, under the guise of continued scientific observation, essentially moved her command staff into the 8th common room. Her presence was a small but significant deterrent. The Inquisitors were hesitant to launch an all-out assault that might also harm the captain of the 5th. But my influence will only buy us time. The pontiff is whipping the public into a frenzy. He needs a devil, and you, she nodded at Naruto, are it. Naruto was standing by the large, circular window on the top floor, looking down at the street. He wasn't watching the Inquisitors. He was watching the civilians who gathered at the barricades, their faces a mixture of fear, anger, and morbid curiosity. He could feel their emotions like a physical weight. They were afraid of him. After everything, they were afraid. It was the village all over again, but this time it felt worse. Last time he was a child, a pariah by circumstance. This time, he was a hero being recast as a villain. This is because of me, he said, his voice low. He turned to face them, his expression etched with a heavy resolve. They want me, not you. I can't let you all be trapped here. Have your lives torn apart because you took me in. Maki, who was standing guard by the door, took a step forward. Don't be an idiot. We're a company. We're a team. We don't abandon our own. She's right, Tamaki added, her voice surprisingly firm. She stood straighter these days, her training with Naruto having given her a core of confidence that even her lure couldn't entirely shatter. We stand with you, Naruto. He looked at them, at the unwavering loyalty in their eyes, and it both warmed his heart and twisted it with guilt. You don't understand, he said, his voice tight. I can get out of here. Easily. I can lead them on a chase across the entire empire. But they'll tear this place apart looking for me. They'll come after all of you. They'll brand you as heretics, too. He clenched his fists. I can't let that happen. I'm going to leave. I'll draw them away. No. The word was quiet but absolute. It came from Maki. She walked until she was standing directly in front of him. Her gaze so intense it felt like a physical force. You're not listening, she said. This isn't about you being a burden. This is about us choosing our side. And we choose you. Hibana let out an elegant sigh, pushing off the wall she was leaning against. As much as it pains me to agree with the muscle-headed gorilla, she's right. She walked over, forming an unlikely triumvirate with Naruto and Maki. I have spent my entire life clawing my way to a position of power so that no one could ever call me gravel again. I will not be told who I can and cannot associate with by some geriatric in a pointy hat and a glorified arms dealer. I made a strategic alliance with you, Uzumaki. I am not about to let my investment be seized by religious fanatics. Her words were couched in arrogance. But her stance was one of pure defiance. She was with him. Tamaki joined them, her small frame radiating a newfound strength. You helped me. You believed in me when no one else did. If they want you, they have to go through me. The entire company was there now. Obi, Hinawa, Shinra, Arthur, even Sister Iris. They formed a silent circle around him. This is your home now, Naruto, Obi said, his voice a bedrock of certainty. And we defend our home. Together. Naruto looked at the faces around him, at the family he had accidentally built in this world of fire. His resolve to leave wavered, replaced by a surge of overwhelming emotion. He had always fought to protect others. The idea of them fighting to protect him was a strange, powerful, and humbling feeling. He was trapped, surrounded, hunted, and he had never felt less alone in his life. The decision was made. They would not surrender. They would not run. They would make their stand. The attack came at dusk. Under the cover of failing light and the shift change, the Inquisitors moved. They didn't storm the gates. Their first move was insidious. A high-frequency hum filled the air, a sound at the edge of hearing that made their teeth ache. Chakra dampers. Hinawa yelled from his command post. They've activated them. Multiple units, creating a perimeter field. Naruto felt it instantly. It was like being plunged into ice water. The natural energy he constantly drew upon was being scattered, thrown into chaos. His connection to Sage Mode flickered and died. The chakra inside him felt sluggish, like trying to run through mud. He could still access it, but it was a struggle. It took effort. His clones, which required a constant, stable flow of chakra, would be weaker, less stable. "They're blinding me," he grunted. The effort to just stand straight noticeable. With their primary target weakened, the Inquisitors began their assault. They didn't use fire. Grappling lines shot up, and dozens of them began scaling the cathedral walls like spiders. Sonic cannons on the street below unleashed focused blasts of sound that shattered the stained glass windows and sent waves of disorienting pressure through the stone walls. Maki, Arthur, Shinra, repel the boarders on the west wall. Obi commanded, his voice cutting through the din. Hibana, your team take the east. Tamaki, with me and Hinawa. We'll provide support from the command center. The battle for the 8th had begun. It was brutal, close quarters fighting in the halls and balconies of their own home. Maki was a whirlwind of destruction. Her iron owls and raw strength sending Inquisitors flying. But for every one she knocked down, 2 more took their place, their silver masks impassive and relentless. Naruto fought with a desperate fury. Without the effortless grace of his sage mode, he was forced to rely on raw taijutsu and the brute force of Kurama's chakra, which he could still call upon, though it felt like dragging an anchor. He was a lion, but a lion fighting in a cage filled with venomous snakes. He took down Inquisitor after Inquisitor, but they were tireless. One of them managed to get close and slam a grav plate onto his chest. Suddenly, Naruto felt his own weight multiply by 10. He crashed to one knee, the stone floor cracking beneath him. He roared, channeling Kurama's power to physically rip the device off him. But the momentary weakness was the opening they needed. 3 Inquisitors swarmed him, their energy-laced staves crackling. A wall of pink-tinged fire erupted between them, sending the Inquisitors reeling back. Hibana landed gracefully in front of him, her eyes blazing. "Get up, Gravel. This is no time for a nap." She created a dome of intense heat around them, forcing the enemy to keep their distance. From another direction, a figure moved with impossible speed, her twin flaming tails a blur. Tamaki, using the control Naruto had taught her, executed a flawless series of acrobatic kicks, disarming 2 Inquisitors before they even knew she was there. Her movements were no longer clumsy, they were precise, deadly, a dance of fire and fury. Maki joined them, her back to Naruto's, her fists raised. "We've got your back," she yelled over the chaos. They stood there, back to back in the heart of the maelstrom. Naruto, weakened but resolute, Maki, the unbreakable shield, Hibana, the proud, fiery queen, and Tamaki, the timid kitten who had found her roar. They were surrounded, outnumbered, and their enemy was using technology designed specifically to neutralize their greatest weapon. And they were winning. But it was a battle of attrition they couldn't sustain. More Inquisitors were pouring in. The dampers were taking their toll. In a brief lull, huddled behind a shattered stone pillar, Naruto looked at the 3 women fighting by his side. Their faces were smudged with soot, their bodies bruised, but their eyes burned with a fierce, defiant light. They were fighting for him. They were willing to die for him. And in that moment, in the heart of the siege, everything became crystal clear. His desire to protect them by leaving was a fool's errand. The only way to court them was to bind them so closely to him that no one would dare try to tear them apart. To make them a part of him, and he a part of them. "Maki, Hibana, Tamaki," he said, his voice cutting through the noise. They all turned to him. "I can't offer you a normal life," he began, his voice raw with an emotion that had nothing to do with the battle. "I can't promise you a quiet home, or peace, or a world that isn't trying to kill us. All I can seem to offer is a life of fighting, of being hunted, of standing against the whole damn world." He took a deep breath, his gaze moving between the 3 of them. "But I want you by my side. Always. Not just as comrades. Not just as friends." He looked at Maki. "I want your strength beside me." He looked at Hibana. "I want your brilliance beside me." He looked at Tamaki. "I want your heart beside me. I'm asking you to be my family," he said, the words hanging in the air, more powerful than any explosion. "My partners. In every sense of the word. I'm asking you to marry me. All of you." Quote, it was the most insane proposal in the history of the world. Made in the middle of a battle, by an interdimensional refugee, to 3 women who by all rights hold have been his rivals or subordinates. For a heartbeat, there was only the sound of fighting outside their small sanctuary. Hibana was the first to react. She let out a short, incredulous laugh, a sound of pure, shocked disbelief. But there was no mockery in it. "You ridiculous piece of gravel," she breathed, shaking her head. "Are you serious? In the middle of this?" "I've never been more serious in my life," Naruto said, his gaze unwavering. Maki didn't laugh. She just looked at him, her tough exterior cracking to reveal the soft, romantic heart she so often hid. A slow, genuine smile spread across her face. A smile of pure joy. "Yes," she said, the word simple, solid, and absolute. Tamaki's eyes filled with tears, but they were tears of happiness. She nodded furiously, unable to speak, and just launched herself at him, wrapping him in a fierce hug. Yes, Hibana watched them, a war of emotions on her face. Her logic, her pride, her ambition, it was all screaming at her to refuse. It was illogical, it was insane, it was sentimental foolishness, but her heart was telling her something else entirely. It was telling her that this man, this force of nature, this ridiculous, earnest, powerful man, was the only one who had ever seen past her crown to the woman beneath. He was the only one who had ever challenged her, protected her, and respected her in equal measure. A life with him would be chaos. It would be a constant battle. It would never, ever be boring. "Oh, what the hell," she said, a wry, defeated smile on her lips. "My life was becoming far too predictable anyway." She stepped forward, completing their circle. Yes, in the heart of the fire, surrounded by enemies, they made their vow. Not with rings, not with a priest, but with a shared, defiant God. And a promise spoken in the language of battle and loyalty. They were a family, a single, indivisible unit. The moment was shattered by a new, more powerful sonic blast that brought a section of the roof down. "Right," Naruto said, a fierce, brilliant grin spreading across his face, the first genuine smile he'd had in days. The sluggishness from the dampers seemed to fade, burned away by the fire of his new resolve. "Family meeting is over. Let's go take out the trash." He was no longer just defending his friends. He was defending his wives. His family. He took a deep breath, not of air, but of chakra. He ignored the disruptive field of the dampers, not by fighting it, but by overwhelming it. He reached deep, past the sluggishness, and grabbed the raw, infinite ocean of power that was Kurama. "Let's show them, Kurama." "With pleasure, Kit." A torrent of crimson chakra erupted from him, so dense and powerful it physically pushed the other three back. It wasn't the out-of-control rage from the nether. This was controlled, focused. The dampers whined and sparked, their fields overloaded by the sheer volume of energy. "A vow forged in fire," Arthur Boyle declared dramatically from a nearby balcony. "Having witnessed the whole thing, my king has taken his queens. A new chapter of our legend begins." Naruto ignored him. He looked at Maki, Hibana, and Tamaki, his eyes glowing with red, slitted power. "Hibana, find the damper units. Give me their locations." "Already on it," she said, her fingers flying over a holographic interface projected from her gauntlet. 3 of them, triangulated positions, on the rooftops of the surrounding buildings. "Maki, Tamaki, with me," Naruto commanded. "We're breaking this siege, now." He didn't wait for the door. He placed a hand on the thick stone wall of the cathedral. Rasengan. A standard, one-handed Rasengan appeared in his palm, and he drove it into the wall. It didn't explode. It ground through the stone like a drill, creating a perfect, man-sized hole in the side of the building. He leapt through it, landing on the street below amidst a squad of shocked inquisitors. Maki and Tamaki were right behind him. "Let's go," he roared, and they charged. It was no longer a defense. It was a counterattack. Naruto, cloaked in the crimson power of the One-Tailed state, was a force of nature. He moved through the inquisitors like a typhoon through a wheat field. They were no longer just fighting a man, they were fighting a Biju. He created a massive Rasenshuriken, but instead of throwing it, he held it aloft. He didn't let it expand. He let the deafening sound and the immense pressure it created wash over the battlefield. The shriek of a million wind blades created a zone of pure sensory overload, and the intense vacuum at its core pulled the air from the Inquisitors' lungs. It was non-lethal, but it was utterly incapacitating. Dozens of them collapsed, gasping and disoriented. The siege was broken. The hunters had become the hunted. From a hidden command vehicle, the Inquisitor leader, a zealot named Titus, watched in horror as his perfect siege crumbled into chaos. His calm crackled. It wasn't the voice of one of his men. It was the cold, melodic chime of the Seraph. "Your pawns have failed, Titus." "As I knew they would. Lord Seraph," Titus stammered. "The anomaly, his power, it's greater than we anticipated." "No," the Seraph's voice replied, devoid of any emotion. "It is exactly as I anticipated. You have served your purpose. You have isolated him. You have pushed him. You have forced him to show his hand. And you have revealed his emotional anchor points." The Seraph had watched the entire scene. The proposal, the vow, the bond that had been forged in the heart of the battle. He now understood. The anomaly's greatest strength was not his power. It was his connection to others. To break the man, you did not need to break his body. You needed to break his heart. "Your crusade has served its purpose, Titus," the Seraph said. "Now, I will begin mine." The line went dead, leaving the Inquisitor leader alone with the sounds of his utter and complete defeat. Chapter 5 End. Chapter 6. The Seraph's Grace. The broken siege left a scar on the city and a target on Naruto's back wider than ever before. The Inquisitors had been humiliated, their state-of-the-art technology and zealous faith shattered. Against the crimson wall of Kurama's power, they had retreated, but the silence that followed was not one of peace, it was the eerie calm before a hurricane. The temple and Hibana were regrouping, their fear now curdled into a desperate, dangerous obsession. For Naruto and his new, unconventional family, the quiet days that followed were a strange paradise. The cathedral, once a prison, now felt like a true sanctuary. The threat from outside had forged an unbreakable bond within. Training sessions became a dance of four, their powers weaving together in a symphony of destruction and defense. Maki's iron fists, now driven by an unchained confidence, would punch holes in reality that Hibana would then fill with precisely controlled vortexes of flame. Tamaki, guided by Naruto, learned to weave her Nekomata flames into whips of fire that could disarm opponents or create diversions with a dancer's grace. And Naruto was the anchor. He pushed them, trained them, but more than that, he watched over them. The nights were filled with a quiet intimacy they had all been starved for. They would gather on the rooftop, not as soldiers, but as a family, sharing stories of their pasts. Naruto spoke of Konoha, of ramen, of a rivalry that forged a bond stronger than blood. Maki spoke of the rigid expectations of her military family, Hibana of her lonely, ruthless climb through the scientific community. And Tamaki of a lifetime spent apologizing for a power she never asked for. In these moments, they weren't the whirlwind, the witch, and the cursed kitten. They were just Maki, Hibana, and Tamaki. And he was just Naruto. For the first time, his vow to them felt real, not as a battlefield declaration, but as a simple, profound truth. He was home. But the Seraph did not deal in peace. He was an architect of sorrow. And he had been watching, learning. He understood that a direct assault on Naruto was an exercise in futility. One did not kill a god by punching it. One killed a god by taking away its worshippers. He needed to isolate Naruto, to break his spirit before breaking his body. And he had identified the perfect fulcrum for his plan. Not the strongest, not the weakest, but the most intellectually arrogant. The one whose domain was a temple of science. Princess Hibana was at Hijima's 3rd Research Division facility, a sprawling complex on the industrial outskirts of the city. She was there under a truce of sorts, requisitioning, or, more accurately, demanding, access to their advanced thermal imaging archives for her own research into Adala. It was a tense but necessary visit. She had her own elite guard with her, but she was deep in the lion's den. The first sign that something was wrong was a flicker of the lights. Then, a low, resonant hum vibrated through the building's foundation. A sound that felt fundamentally wrong, like a note played in a key that shouldn't exist. Status report. Hibana snapped into her calm, her instincts screaming. The reply was a burst of static, then a single, terrified word. Everywhere. The Seraph did not arrive with fire and brimstone. He simply was. One moment, the main laboratory was a sterile white room filled with scientists, the next. He stood in its center, a silent figure in his white robes and silver mask. He didn't move. He didn't speak. He simply raised a hand. And the laws of physics began to scream. The fires started first, but they were unnatural. They weren't yellow or orange, but a sickly, violet black, and they burned without consuming fuel. They simply appeared, clinging to walls and ceilings like malevolent ghosts. Then came the cold. Pockets of absolute zero materialized in midair, flash-freezing equipment and unlucky scientists into brittle statues of ice. The building's automated fire suppression system activated, but the water that sprayed from the sprinklers turned to steam before it traveled a foot, while in other places, it froze into jagged icicles that rained down like daggers. It was a symphony of chaos, conducted by a silent maestro. He was not creating fire or ice. He was rewriting the rules of thermodynamics in his immediate vicinity. He was commanding the very concepts of heat and cold. Hibana's guards opened fire, their pyrokinetic abilities lashing out. The seraph didn't even look at them. He made a small, dismissive gesture, and the kinetic energy of their attacks simply vanished. The fireballs didn't hit a barrier. They just stopped, inches from his robes, and dissipated into nothing. "Your power is a crude parlor trick," the seraph's voice chimed, echoing through the pandemonium. "You play with the symptoms of combustion. I command the cause." He looked at Hibana, his masked face betraying no emotion. "You are the bait, witch. Scream for your savior. Let him come and witness true grace." Quote, the building's emergency bulkheads slammed down, sealing the entire facility. The trap was set. Naruto felt it like a physical blow. He was in the 8th training yard with Maki and Tamaki. And he suddenly stumbled, a hand flying to his chest. His connection to Hibana, a faint, empathetic link forged from their new, profound bond, had just erupted in a spike of pure, unadulterated terror. "Hibana," he gasped. Maki and Tamaki were at his side instantly. "What is it? What's wrong?" "It's the seraph," Naruto said, his eyes wide with a cold dread. "He has her." There was no discussion, no need for orders. The three of them moved as one. Naruto grabbed them both, and with a swirl of leaves and chakra, the world dissolved. They reappeared on a street outside the Hijima facility. The building was a horrifying tableau. Black, heatless flames licked from its windows, while other sections were coated in a thick, unnatural frost. The entire area was sealed, surrounded by a perimeter of panicked Hijima security who were too terrified to approach. "This energy, it's chaos," Maki said, her second-generation senses overwhelmed by the contradictory signals. "He's toying with her," Naruto growled, his knuckles white. "He's trying to draw me in." He looked at the sealed bulkhead, the only visible entrance. It was a 10-inch thick slab of reinforced steel. "I can melt it," Maki said, her hands already glowing as she prepared to summon Sputter and Flare. "No time," Naruto said. He stepped in front of the door and took a deep breath. He didn't use a Rasengan. He didn't use a flashy jutsu. He simply drew back his fist, cloaking it in a thin, almost invisible layer of Kurama's chakra. He channeled all his focus, all his rage, all his fear for Hibana into a single point on his knuckles. He punched the bulkhead. The sound was not an explosion. It was a single, deafening crack that sounded like the sky breaking. There was no deformation, no dent. A web of hairline fractures erupted from the point of impact, and the entire 10-inch thick steel door simply disintegrated into a cloud of metallic dust. Naruto walked through the opening without breaking stride, Maki and Tamaki right behind him. The sight that greeted them was a warzone of contradictions. Fires burned next to pillars of ice. The air was filled with pockets of vacuum that stole the breath and zones of crushing pressure. And in the center of the main atrium, the seraph stood waiting, his silver mask gleaming. "The anomaly arrives," his voice chimed. "Predictable. You are bound by sentiment. It is your fatal flaw." Quote, Naruto's eyes glowed with the first hints of red. "Where is she?" The seraph gestured vaguely upwards. "She is witnessing a lesson in humility. As will you." The battle began without another word. Naruto blurred forward, his speed shattering the sound barrier. He threw a punch aimed directly at the seraph's masked face, a blow backed by the strength of a tailed beast. It should have turned the man into a red mist. It stopped, 1 inch from the mask. Naruto's eyes widened in shock. His fist was frozen in midair, held not by a physical force, but by a sheer absence of it. Your power is based on kinetic energy, the seraph explained, his tone that of a lecturer. Motion. Force. But what is motion, without a space to move through? What is force, without a law to govern its impact? He made a subtle gesture, and the kinetic energy of Naruto's punch was simply unmade. The force dissipated. Naruto was pushed back, not by a blow, but by the sudden resolution of his own aborted attack. This was a conceptual fight. Naruto was a master of applying energy. The seraph was a master of denying it. Maki, Tamaki, find Hibana. Naruto roared, realizing he couldn't hold back. Get her out of here. The two women didn't hesitate. They knew their role. This was a fight only Naruto could wage. They broke off, heading for the upper levels, battling the chaotic environmental hazards the seraph had created. Naruto changed tactics. He formed a Rasengan, a grinding vortex of pure destructive power. He thrust it forward. The seraph raised a hand, and the ace in front of him became a zone of absolute stasis. The laws of energy transfer and rotation ceased to exist within that 5-foot sphere. The Rasengan, starved of the principles that allowed it to function, unraveled into a harmless puff of chakra. Frustrating, isn't it? The seraph taunted. Trying to burn a book when your enemy has erased the word fire. Naruto backed away, his mind racing. Every attack he had was being negated. Taijutsu, ninjutsu, it was all useless. He was a god of war fighting a god of grammar, and the grammar Nazi was winning. Kurama, what do we do? The fox's voice was a low growl in his mind. This isn't a contest of power, Kit. It's a contest of rules. His rules come from Adala. Yours come from our world. You can't win by playing his game. You have to break the board. Break the board. Naruto looked at the seraph, at the effortless way he commanded reality. His power wasn't his own. It was a gift, a grace, from the evangelist. It was a tether. His power comes from that burning world. You need to sever his connection, not fight his effects. The realization hit Naruto like a lightning bolt. He couldn't attack the man. He had to attack his power source. Meanwhile, on the upper levels, Maki and Tamaki found Hibana. She was trapped in her own lab, but not by a physical barrier. The seraph had created a perfect vacuum around her, a bubble of absolute nothingness. She was alive, protected by a shimmering, pink-tinged sphere of her own heat energy, a desperate, last-ditch, heat shield, she'd theorized but never attempted. It was keeping the vacuum at bay, but it was failing. Cracks were appearing in the shield, and her face was pale with strain. Hibana, Maki yelled, punching a hole through the lab's glass wall. About time, you slowpokes. Hibana gasped, sweat beading on her forehead. This thing, it doesn't just negate heat, it negates the concept of it. I'm running on fumes. How do we get you out? Tamaki asked, her Nekomata flames flaring, useless against the void. You have to disrupt the field. Hibana yelled. It's being projected from him. From the seraph. You have to give Naruto an opening. Down below, Naruto made his move. He closed his eyes, ignoring the seraph completely. He entered Six Paths Sage mode, but not to fight. His body ignited in its now familiar golden cloak. He wasn't looking for his opponent. He was looking for the tether. He stretched out his senses, not his physical senses, but the divine senses granted by the sage. He ignored the chaotic physics of the room and searched for the one constant, the stream of unnatural, Adala-based energy pouring into the seraph. And he found it. It was an invisible, shimmering cord of violet-black energy, stretching from the seraph's back into a pinprick in reality itself, a micro-rift leading directly to Adala. Hiding in your own mind, anomaly. The seraph chimed, taking a step forward. There is no escape. I'm not escaping, Naruto said, his eyes snapping open. They were glowing gold. I'm cutting the strings. He brought his hands together, and the 9 truth-seeking orbs materialized behind him. The seraph, for the first time, took a half step back. He recognized that power. The power of nullification. Maki. Tamaki. Now, Naruto yelled, his voice echoing with sage-like authority. On the upper level, the two women heard his call. They shared a look of pure, desperate resolve. Let's make a big fire, Maki said. A really big one. Tamaki agreed. They combined their powers. Maki created sputter and flare, but instead of using them for defense, she poured all her energy into making them as large and as hot as possible. Tamaki wrapped them in her own Nekomata flames, the pink fire acting as an accelerant, a supercharger. They created a single, massive, spiraling lance of dual-colored fire and launched it not at the vacuum bubble, but at the ceiling above the seraph. The attack blew a massive hole in the floor, raining debris and a tidal wave of pure, conventional fire down on the atrium. It was a massive, chaotic diversion. The seraph, forced to deal with this sudden, crude assault, momentarily shifted his focus. He waved a hand, and the fire was extinguished. The debris halted in midair. But that split-second distraction was all Naruto needed. He moved. He wasn't a blur. He had ceased to be a part of linear motion. One instant he was across the room. The next he was behind the seraph. He had molded one of his truth-seeking orbs, the power to erase all things, into an infinitesimally small, sharp blade held between his fingers. He didn't strike the seraph's body. He sliced through the invisible, metaphysical cord connecting him to Adala. There was a sound that was not a sound, a psychic scream of severance that tore through the astral plane. The seraph's body convulsed violently. The silver mask cracked. The air around him, once warped and distorted by his conceptual power, snapped back to normal with a thunderclap. The black fires vanished. The pockets of vacuum imploded. The unnatural cold dissipated. Upstairs, the sphere of nothingness around Hibana vanished. She collapsed to the ground, gasping for air, her own protective heat shield fizzling out. The seraph staggered, clutching his head. He was cut off from his god. His reality editing powers were gone. He was now just an immensely powerful third-generation pyrokinetic. One who channeled pure Adala flame. He was a dragon again, not a god. And he was facing a very, very angry deity of his own. He spun around, unleashing a torrent of pure, white-hot Adala flame. The holiest of fires. Naruto met it with a wall of golden, Kurama-infused chakra. The two energies clashed in a titanic struggle, but the fight was already over. The seraph had lost his ultimate weapon. Naruto still had his. Naruto pushed through the flames, his golden cloak burning them away. He appeared before the staggering seraph, his hand already forming a Rasengan. But this one was different. It was golden, filled with the calm, clean energy of his sage mode. "This is for Hibana," he said, his voice cold. He slammed the golden Rasengan into the seraph's chest. The resulting explosion was immense. A beautiful, terrible flower of golden energy that blew out the rest of the building's walls and sent the seraph flying, his robes burning, his body broken. He crashed into the street outside. A broken puppet. His silver mask fell away, revealing the face of a man with eyes burned white, his expression one of utter, soul-shattering disbelief. He had been abandoned by his god. Naruto landed softly beside him. Maki, Tamaki, and a weak but furious Hibana joined him moments later. The seraph coughed, his body already beginning to be consumed by his own unstable, unchecked flames. "You have only delayed the coming of grace," he rasped, a fanatic to the very end. "The world still must burn, to be saved." He looked at Naruto, a flicker of something almost like pity in his dying eyes. "The evangelist has seen you. It knows you. It will not send an agent next time. It will come for you." With a final, silent scream, his body was consumed, leaving behind nothing but a scorch mark and a cracked silver mask. The battle was won. They were alive, reunited. The four of them stood in the wreckage, the rising sun casting long shadows behind them. They had faced a conceptual god and beaten him. But the victory felt hollow. The warning lingered in the air, a promise of a greater, more terrible darkness to come. That night, there were no words. There was no need for them. In the quiet sanctuary of the cathedral, their vow, forged in the heat of a siege, was finally, truly consummated. It was a desperate, profound coming together of four souls who had been adrift and had found their anchor in each other. They sought solace and strength not from a victory won, but for the war they knew was on the horizon. They were a family, a single unit, and they would face the end of the world together. Chapter 6 End. Chapter 7. The day the sun burned. The seraph's defeat did not bring peace. It brought an answer. For the evangelist, floating in its sea of fire and despair, The destruction of its prime agent was not a loss, it was a data point. It had tested the anomaly. It had learned the texture of his soul, the nature of his power, and the tethers of his heart. It had learned that this Naruto Uzumaki was not just an obstacle, he was an antithesis, a fundamental law of a foreign reality made flesh. A reality of will, of bonds, of life clinging to life. Suck. A concept was poison to the evangelist's truth, the holy, silent salvation of universal combustion. The anomaly could not be assimilated. It could not be broken by proxy. It had to be erased. And to erase it, the board itself had to be set on fire. The plan was accelerated. The whispers from Adala became a roar. Across the Tokyo Empire, the remaining loyalists of the White Clad moved as one. EY were no longer a cult operating in the shadows, they were a righteous army, their faces lit by a fanatical gleam. Simultaneously, within the Holy Saul Temple, the pontiff and his corrupted priests began a new, dark sermon. They spoke of the final day, of a false sun rising in the sky, and of the need to embrace the coming grace. They had become the evangelist's willing mouthpieces. The first sign was the sky. The perpetual brown haze over Tokyo began to darken, not with clouds, but with a deep, bruised purple. Then, directly over the city's center, the sky began to tear. It wasn't a physical rip, but a bleed. A circle of blackness appeared, and at its heart, a new sun began to burn. It was not the life-giving gold of their Saul, but a sun of pure Adala, a vortex of black and violet flame that radiated not heat, but a profound and chilling despair. As the dark sun grew, its influence washed over the city. Spontaneous combustion skyrocketed. Infernals, dozens, then hundreds of them, began to spawn from the terrified populace, not as mindless beasts, but as a unified, shrieking army, their eyes all fixed on the false sun. The second great cataclysm had begun. It's happening. Hinawa's voice was grim. His fingers a blur across his keyboard in the 8th command center. The room was a hive of activity, a command post for the apocalypse. The energy readings are off the scale. Adala is bleeding into our world. The pillars, the white clad are moving on them. All of them. They're trying to gather them at the epicenter, beneath the dark sun. Captain Obi stood over the central map table, his face a grim mask. This is it, then. Everything we've fought for. He looked up, his gaze sweeping over the assembled soldiers of the 8th, and the allied forces who had gathered with them. The remnants of Company 5 stood ready. Benimaru Shinman, the captain of the 7th, was there with his Asakusa vigilantes, his usual lazy demeanor replaced by razor-sharp focus. Even Captain Honda O.F. II had defied the temple and brought his men. They were a ragged, defiant coalition against the end of the world. The pillars are amplifiers, Hibana stated, her voice sharp and clinical despite the chaos. She was pointing at a projection of the dark sun. The white clad will use them to anchor that thing to our world, creating a permanent bridge. If they succeed, the merger will be absolute. Our reality will be consumed. Then we stop them, a simple voice said. All eyes turned to the cathedral's entrance. Naruto stood there, flanked by Maki and Tamaki. He was no longer just wearing his tattered jacket. Over it, he wore a new, custom-made Fire Force coat, deep black with the 8th Cross and8 insignia, but with vibrant orange lining. It was a symbol of his place in this world, a gift from his new family. He was calm. The frantic energy of the past few days was gone, replaced by the serene, unshakable confidence of a man who knew his purpose. He had faced down gods and monsters, and now, the abyss itself was staring back. He did not flinch. Naruto, Obi began. I can feel it, Naruto said, his sage mode active, his golden eyes fixed on the distant, dark sun. The linchpin. It's like the battle with Kagaya. There's a central point, a throne, where the energy is being channeled. The pillars are the keys, but that throne is the lock. If we destroy it, we can cut the head off the snake. It's at the heart of the city, Benimaru said, his eyes narrowed. Under that ugly star, the entire white-clad army and 1,000 infernals are between us and it. Then we make a path, Naruto said. His gaze met Maki's, then Tamaki's, then Hibana's. A silent conversation passed between them, a reaffirmation of their vow. The battle for Tokyo was an explosion of organized chaos. It was not one fight. But 100 fought street by street, block by block. The United Fire Force companies became a spear, with Benimaru and his destructive power at its tip, punching a hole through the main infernal host. The other companies peeled off, engaging in desperate battles to protect evacuating civilians and prevent the city from being completely overrun. The core team, the true spearhead, was a unit of 4. They moved through the war zone like a force of nature. Maki was the vanguard, a walking fortress. Her sputter and flare, now massive and dense from her boundless confidence, formed an impenetrable, mobile shield. Infernals crashed against her flaming owls and were reduced to embers. When a particularly large one broke through, she met it with a punch that shattered its flaming body like glass. Sloppy. Hibana's voice would crackle from behind. Your heat signature is fluctuating. Stabilize it. Hibana was their battlefield commander, perched on a rooftop with a bird's eye view. She wasn't just fighting, she was conducting. A flick of her wrist would create a heat lens in the air, focusing a stray sunbeam into a laser that would cripple an infernal's leg. Shish. E would increase the ambient temperature around a group of enemies, making Maki's fire owls burn twice as hot. Tamaki was their outrider, a blur of pink and orange flame. Her Nekomata abilities, once a source of shame, were now a dazzling display of acrobatic lethality. She danced through the battlefield, her flaming tails like whips, tripping up titanic infernals, her fire-enhanced kicks striking with the force of cannonballs at their weak points, creating openings for the others. She was the whirlwind Naruto had asked her to be, a beautiful, deadly distraction. And Naruto was the tip of the spear. He moved through the enemy ranks, a golden meteor of power. He didn't need recentricans for every foe. A simple chakra-enhanced fist would shatter an infernal's core. A shadow clone would ear to intercept an attack meant for his wives. A miniature Rasengan would clear a path through a dozen enemies at once. He was an army of one, perfectly synchronized with his queens. Naruto, 3 o'clock, a giant class, emerging from the subway. Hibana's voice directed. On it. Maki yelled, moving to intercept. Don't bother. I've got it. Tamaki cheered, leaping from a collapsing building, spinning in midair, and delivering a devastating axe kick to the back of the giant's neck, sending it crashing to the ground. Their teamwork was flawless, a deadly ballet they had perfected in the fires of training and the bonds of love. They fought their way to the city's center, to the ruins of a skyscraper that stood directly beneath the baleful gaze of the dark sun. At its base, the white-clad had gathered the 8 pillars, who were suspended in cages of black fire, their terrified life force being drained to fuel the portal. And on a makeshift throne of rubble and twisted steel sat the linchpin. It was not a resurrected seraph. It was something worse. It was one of the white-clad's most devoted disciples, a woman who had willingly offered her body as a vessel. The evangelist's power poured into her, twisting her form. Her body was a porcelain shell, cracked with lines of black fire, and from her back sprouted 6 skeletal wings of pure Adala flame. She was an angel of the apocalypse, and she radiated a power that made the seraphs feel like a candle's flicker. The anomaly. The vessel spoke, her voice a chorus of 1,000 whispers. You have come to witness the salvation. The final, perfect, silent grace. We're here to shut you up, Naruto said, his golden 6-path sage mode cloak flaring to life. Maki, Hibana, Tamaki. Free the pillars. I'll handle the angel. Don't be stupid, we're not leaving you. Maki shouted. You're not, he said, giving them a fierce grin. You're just doing your part. Trust me. The 3 women looked at each other, then nodded. They trusted him. They broke off, fighting through the remaining elite white-clad guards towards the captive pillars. The final battle began. Naruto versus the vessel of the evangelist. It was a fight that transcended the physical realm. The vessel didn't just throw fire, she warped reality. She turned the ground beneath Naruto's feet to lava, which he simply ran across. She summoned lances of solidified despair, which he shattered with his truth-seeking orbs. He was pushed back, his power, immense as it was, struggling against a foe who was a direct conduit to an entire dimension of hostile energy. He formed a recentrican, a massive, screaming vortex of power, and hurled it. The vessel simply smiled, and a wave of pure null space washed over it, unmaking the attack completely. She was stronger than the seraph. She had a greater, more direct connection to the evangelist. Kit, this isn't working. Kurama roared in his mind. Her power is infinite. It's drawing from her entire dimension. You can't outmuscle it. There's only one way. A full-power Biju bomb. It will obliterate her in the portal, but it will take out half the city and the pillars with it. Naruto was thrown back, crashing through the remains of a wall. He looked up, his golden cloak flickering. He saw the city burning around him. He saw his friends, his comrades, fighting and dying to protect it. He saw Maki, using our body as a shield to protect a fallen pillar. He saw Hibana, desperately trying to cool the cages of black fire. He saw Tamaki, fighting with the ferocity of a cornered tigress to give them time. He would not sacrifice the city to save it. He would not become the monster they thought he was. He had made a promise. He looked at his wives, fighting for their world, for him. He felt the unwavering trust they had in him. The strength of their bond, the fierce, protective love that now defined him. And he found another answer. He pushed himself to his feet, his body battered but his will unbroken. He closed his eyes. Kurama, he said, his voice calm. You're right, we can't beat her with power. So we won't. He didn't draw on more of Kurama's rage. He did the opposite. He reached for the core of his own being. He combined the perfect, balanced energy of Six Paths Sage Mode, the power of understanding all things. He blended it with the vast, oceanic life force of Kurama, the power of creation and vitality. And then, he added a third element, the one he had just truly understood. He drew on the emotional energy of his bond with Maki, Tamaki, and Hibana. Their strength, their brilliance, their heart, their love for him, and his for them. It was a power the evangelist, a being of pure, solipsistic hunger, could never comprehend. The power of will, not to destroy, but to protect. A new energy bloomed within him. It was not gold, it was not red, it was a brilliant, pure, sun-white. A new sphere formed in his hand. It looked like a Rasengan, but it did not spin with destructive force. It pulsed with a gentle, rhythmic light. Like a heartbeat. It did not radiate heat or killing intent. It radiated a profound sense of peace, of hope, of life. He called it the Rasengan of salvation. The vessel watched him, her head tilted. A new trick. It is useless. All will return to the flame. She unleashed her ultimate attack, a wave of pure Adala energy, the essence of the dark sun, a tide of absolute despair that would unmake the soul. Naruto walked forward to meet it. He held the white, pulsing sphere before him. He didn't shout an attack name. He simply pushed the Rasengan of salvation into the wave of darkness. There was no explosion. There was only light. The white sphere touched the Adala energy and did not destroy it. It purified it. The black, hungry void was washed clean, converted from an energy of despair into one of simple, neutral light. The wave of salvation washed over the vessel. She screamed, but not in pain. Her skeletal wings of black fire turned to pure, white light. The cracks on her body healed. The chorus of 1,000 whispers in her voice faded, leaving only the sound of a single, human woman, weeping in relief. The evangelist's consciousness was forcibly, completely ejected from her body, banished back to its dimension by an energy it could not touch, could not consume, could not comprehend. The wave of white light expanded, washing over the battlefield. The dark sun in the sky flickered, then vanished, its connection to this world severed. The infernals on the street below stopped their rampage, the malign intelligence guiding them gone. They crumbled, not into ash, but into motes of peaceful, golden light, their tormented souls finally, truly put to rest. The cataclysm was averted. The world was saved. Naruto stood in the center of the devastation, his white light fading. He was exhausted, his chakra reserves almost completely dry. He fell to one knee, breathing heavily. He heard footsteps. He looked up. Maki, Tamaki, and Hibana were standing before him. They were bruised, battered, and covered in soot, but they were alive. And their eyes were shining with a love and awe so profound it took his breath away. Without a word, they knelt beside him, wrapping him in their arms, supporting him. A shield, a queen, and a whirlwind, holding their hero, their husband, their family. He leaned into their embrace, the exhaustion washing over him. He looked past them, at the scarred but standing city, at the sky that was slowly returning to its normal, hazy blue. The war was over. For today, the evangelist was still out there, a looming, eternal threat in the darkness between worlds. It knew his name now. It would be back. But Naruto was no longer a stranger, an anomaly. He was a protector, a husband, and a father-to-be, though they didn't know that part yet. He looked at the faces of the women he loved, his anchors in this new reality. The fight for their world, and for their family, had just begun. And he was ready. Chapter 7 End.